The time is 6:34, and we will begin with open session. Marilyn, do we have any agenda-related comments tonight? Okay, great. As I've said before, there are 2 opportunities for audience members to address the Board of Education. We appreciate your participation, but please understand we do not engage in dialogue. If there is a specific question or comment that requires follow-up, the appropriate administrator will respond at a later time. Individuals addressing the board are expected to conduct themselves with respect and civility pursuant to Board Policy 830. Individuals shall not use vulgar or obscene language or impede, delay, disrupt, or interfere with a board meeting. In the event this occurs, you will receive 1 warning regarding your conduct. If the behavior occurs again, you will be notified that you're in violation of trespassing and will be asked to leave our property. Failure to comply immediately and cooperatively with a directive to leave will result in the involvement of law enforcement officials. Marilyn, can you please call our first speaker?
Kara Farrell.
So each month for the past 2.5 years, I've either attended or listened to these meetings, and there's a theme that runs through them, and it's deeply concerning as it relates to education. It's what I like to call the battle theme. We're in a fight here at school. We're constantly fighting various things. We're a school of activists, those trying to use vigorous campaigning to bring about political and social change. We're not a school of education. We fight for BLM, we fight for equity, we fight for masks on, we fight for masks off, fight to erase the hate, fight for microaggressions, battle implicit bias, we fight racism, we fight the pyramid of hate or the triangle of prejudice, depending on the week. We have to be careful we're not headed towards extermination or genocide. We fight political battles in our school. We fight for grade policies that make sense to the developmental stage of teenagers and their parents. If textbooks are mentioned, they're charged and loaded, so we fight pornography in our libraries. We fight for LGBTQT, we fight tampons in the boys' bathroom. We fight for inclusion of certain groups. There's a common theme. What we don't do, we don't educate. The school-home partnership is degraded. The majority of families believe the purpose of the public schools is to educate, not indoctrinate, create teenage activists, or radicalize a group of young people. You're the Board of Education. Not the Board of Health, you're not the Board of Equity, you're not the Board of Politics, you're not the Board of Hate Fighters, you're not the Board of Activists. The word's education. Your community defined your roles, and yet you overstep each week. Last week, during Howard and Rose's presentation on the LT Parent Hate Forum, he mentioned parents staying in their lane and schools staying in theirs. He didn't define the lanes. Let's consider the lanes. Consider why 10% of the students who were enrolled here in the last 3 years aren't here now. Where are they? Consider why the graduating class of McClure Junior High, a Western Springs feeder school, has less than 40 coming here next year. Consider why your AP scores and all your metrics fell so significantly that parents felt the need to take their children elsewhere, and what your plans are to dig yourself out of this academic plummet. Stop wasting class time and instruction time on survey after survey, which you use as justification to further divide and identify students at anything but academics. Stop hiding behind excuses like the state's making us do it. You're our Board of Ed. You're accountable to this community. Your moral compass has shifted the last few years, and you need to reevaluate and quickly reset. Stop fighting against values that the families and the communities promote. Families like homework, accountability, grades that aren't standard-based, regardless of what you choose to call them. Children's like structure, dependability, and routine. They perhaps don't like deadlines, but they need real ones, not moving targets. Parents expect a strong school-home partnership, not a battle. Choose rigor and excellence in all things academic, stay in your lane. Students want to learn about geometry in geometry class, English language and literature in English, and families and students are not interested in whatever your outside agenda is that you have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Marilyn, do you have anyone else?
No, the other 2 are at the end of the second public.
Great, thank you. That concludes tonight's agenda-related public comments. We will move on to our first agenda item under Human Resources, Stipend Committee Recommendations. Ed Piotrowski.
Thank you, President Dillon. We do have 4 stipend committee recommendations that we are bringing forward in April. 2 of those recommendations are for activities that are moving from a pilot status to a full recognized club status. And then we have 2 additional stipend recommendations. One is for a club through expansion, and the other one is for athletics through expansion as well. The two activities are Creative Writing Club and Fashion Club. Both of those clubs were approved for pilot status in the winter of 2020, right before the school closed down at the onset of the pandemic. As you may recall, we have a couple of clubs that we are working through at this time to finalize the pilot status. Both of these clubs, Creative Writing Club and Fashion Club, have indicated that they have strong student participation, not only throughout the pandemic, but once we went back into school, students participating and attending those meetings. So at this time, we are recommending that we do approve both Creative Writing Club and Fashion Club at the minimum 2.64% stipend. Then we do also have Rock Climbing Club and Water Polo. Rock Climbing Club, we are recommending the creation of an assistant for Rock Climbing Club, primarily for safety reasons. We do have a large number of students who participate in Rock Climbing Club outside of the school day. We do have students who participate in adventure ed, which is rope course, sometimes kayak, things along those lines in PE, but these are this club is for students outside of the school day. But because we have lots of students on the rock climbing walls, on the high ropes course, it is paramount that we have adequate supervision. So we are making a recommendation to have a second stipend for Rock Climbing Club. And then finally for water polo. Water polo is a team that is rapidly growing, not only at Lyons Township High School, but in the state as well, too. We found ourselves in a situation where we have now 3 teams, but 2 coaches that rotate among those teams to provide coverage for practices as well as for competitions. This has come in conflict with some scheduling where we might be playing against teams that have 3 dedicated teams, but we don't have coach coverage to be able to provide coaching supervision during that time. So what we are recommending for both boys and girls water polo is the addition of an assistant coach, which would take the responsibilities of being the head frosh soft or JV1, however the athletics department sees fit, for one of the lower level teams, and then that coach would also serve as an assistant coach for the upper levels as well. This would allow all of our students to be able to participate not only in practices but also events, and provide another person to be able to provide safety and supervision for the students when they are in the water. All of these recommendations have gone before the stipend committee and have been recommended to the administration and discussed at the central leadership team as well. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have at this time.
Anybody? Ed?
Yeah.
Just curious, the Rock Climbing Club, is it entirely here at LT?
Yes, it is.
It's entirely here, okay.
They do have some excursions where they go off-site, but in terms of, the vast majority of the events, it happens here over at our North Campus in the field house.
Okay. And then, does this entail everything that you're recommending for the year, or?
These are the ones, we're in a little bit of an odd cycle because we had some clubs because of the pandemic that were kind of mid-season. So we anticipate we might have 1 or 2 in June, and then we'll be back on the regular cycle for next year. Normally we will make these recommendations either at the semester and at the end of the year, but this being a little bit of an odd year because, for instance, Creative Writing Club has been in a pilot status for over a year. We want to try to recognize them and get that into the full status as quickly as possible.
Okay.
But everybody else should be back on that regular cycle.
Okay. And the last question, for that June meeting or for the next meeting where you anticipate maybe bringing a couple other things forward, if there are any clubs that are not moving forward or will continue in the pilot status, would you be able to talk about those at that time as well?
We certainly can. I mean, generally what we do when we bring the clubs to the Board of Education, we're just bringing them to the board when there's money involved with them. The stipend committee has been responsible for making those determinations about whether something is in pilot status or not approved for pilot status. So we haven't brought those to the Board of Education in the past, but that's something we could consider in the future.
Yeah, it would be kind of nice to see who's continuing on in pilot
Sure.
status, and if there's any that have not made it through, that would be
Sure.
nice to see as well, and
Sure.
have an opportunity to view that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.
The next agenda item is the 2022-23 summer workshops, second reading. Scott Eggerding.
Thank you, President Dillon. We do have a second reading here of these workshops. There's really only one major change. We had in there last reading for a construction and geometry course. We did not get enough enrollment to run that course, so we're not going to run the workshop. So that's been pulled out, and that's reduced the overall totals. So everything in the packet has been updated. What we're looking at this point is using grant funds for approximately $54,100 and district costs for $34,800. And as you can see in previous years, usually only about 3/4 of what is approved is ultimately spent for a number of reasons. There are conflicts of dates, so people can't make all of the days of a workshop, or we also estimate the cost on the high end. We have a range based on teacher seniority as to how they're paid for summer workshops. We estimate everything, assuming teachers are at the high end of the range. Again, we want to make sure that when we approve this, we're not going to go over this amount. As suggested in the cover letter, we're expecting roughly $71,000 total expenditures, with the district costs around $28,000 for the summer workshops. Just as a reminder, we're looking at setting up our professional learning through the professional learning team. We have our equity ambassadors. They'll be working this summer. We're looking to have three teams with A to F grading: American Studies Prep, the English Learning Reading, and English for Special Ed. They were a part of the presentation in February and want a little more training. They haven't gone through any training and wanted to go through some to fine-tune their course. We are looking to have a summer professional week, really to work on updated things, not only with technology, but some refreshers for some curriculum areas. And that's for the instructors, and then the refresher sessions. We're estimating 200 staff members participating. Again, this is one that, depending on our grant funds, we could take some of that underage, and if more people wanted to be involved, we could allow them to be involved and not go over the estimated amount. So we'll keep tabs on that as well. Those are the ones for curriculum and staff development in the areas of fine arts and global studies. These are both really working on curriculum alignment. Spanish 2 in particular, because of our shift to the Indiana University courses. Spanish 2 is aligning to make sure that they're transitioning well into that Indiana University curriculum for the third year. U.S. History is looking to coordinate its efforts across multiple levels, Prep, Excel, and American Studies, so they'll be getting together this summer, and also looking at the new state social studies standards that just were released. And then in language arts, we have the new, the revision, the return of the EL reading class. English 2 Honors and English 4 World Lit are looking to, again, coordinate what they've been working on for the past year. Math Science is a number of new courses: healthcare careers and urban agriculture, data, as well as data probability. The math alt assessment is getting a group of math teachers together to come up with additional ways that math teachers could create opportunities for students to demonstrate additional learning rather than having to retake a whole test. Maybe they have an opportunity to do an activity or demonstrate their learning a different way. So they're going to come up with a couple of models that could be modeled and shared with their with our algebra, geometry, and algebra 2 classes. And then for biology storylining, that's been a shift in our biology course for the last couple of years. We have a few teachers who've never been through training, and we thought it'd be good to get them all together and get them all on the same page with maximizing the way storylining is delivered. New courses in physical welfare with yoga and junior strength training. And as you recall, 2 years ago, we started an SEL program embedded into our freshman PE. They want to get together and see how they can make improvements on that particular initiative. Special ed needs to work with our life health program to update a lot of the materials. And then in student services, as we approved last month, we will get work on co-teaching. The training will occur not only for a broad range of teachers, not just the ones who are going to be co-teaching in the fall, but those who will most likely lean in that direction the following year, as well as then giving time for those teachers who are co-teaching the time they need to get coordinated and ready to go. So quite a bit of work going on in the summer. Be happy to answer any questions about any of those requests.
Scott, the only one that catches my eye is the A to F grading. Not a surprise, I've asked questions about that one before, and thanks for the additional detail. It sounds like there are some teams that are interested in transitioning there, and I know we had some other information come in the last month from the LTEA with some feedback, as well as an email today that we have printed with what classes are already in that model. So I have just a couple questions. Anyone that's already piloting or using A through F, are those teams asking to, or are they permitted to revert back to previous? Or is it once you've transitioned, you're never coming back?
No, I mean, if it's not working for you and you still need to do significant curriculum revision, you can move out.
Okay, and have any of the pilot courses requested?
Not to my knowledge, although I can certainly double check by Monday night.
Okay, I'm just trying to get a sense of, it sounds like there's 30 of the 250 courses that have moved that way to A through F, and it sounds like there's another 3. I don't have a sense, or maybe I haven't been on the board long enough to hear kind of the overall timeline or plan, but it seems like a very small number.
Yeah, it's definitely
continue to
pilot
move
phase.
there.
And actually, one of those that's on there is already on your list. That's the special ed
Okay.
cross-cat.
So I'm just trying to balance whether, trying to, I guess, gauge the support for moving forward and whether it's responsible to approve dollars for 3 courses to move to something where I don't necessarily have a comprehensive view of a full transition plan, and where I've just recently read some concerning feedback, I guess, from some of the implementation teams, and also heard glowing feedback from others. So I'm just kind of feeling conflicted on the topic, and just wanted to make sure I'm hearing these 3 teams are on board, they want to do this, and I don't want to prevent progress from people who want to advance and move to a new format. But am I gauging everything correctly? There is support, these people are asking for
Correct.
moving forward. Okay.
And we're also going to be getting some more feedback from teams that are currently in the A to F pilot.
Okay.
So over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to be, before we got feedback from teams, we interviewed, Scott, Katie, and myself interviewed teams together collectively. This time, we're going to grab individual feedback from members of the teams that are currently piloting. So there might be some additional discussion about their status moving forward when we do get that feedback from them in the next few weeks.
Okay. Thanks.
So these course teams are the ones who raised their hand?
Correct.
Okay, there are 3 of them. Is
So,
there any chance you would get a few more that all of a sudden wanted to jump on board? I mean, as far as with the planning, I'm just saying that, if this covers us.
I guess it's always possible. Again, if you recall from the presentations in February, the amount of curriculum redesign that needs to happen to make it work is not something that teams will get together the next week or two and go, hey, you want to do that A to F thing?
Right, it's a
Right?
lot of work.
So it's going to be pretty deliberate to make that shift. And as I mentioned as well, one of the 3 teams that'll be in this workshop has already made the change and is on your list of doing A to F. They would just like to get better at it.
Okay. So it's like
Yep.
enhancement.
very methodical. So the teams that are looking at the alternative math assessment, is that going across like prep, Excel,
Correct.
so all levels?
Right.
For the summer professional week, when there are a variety of sessions that teachers can participate in, I know that there are a lot around, or at least a handful, it looks like, about formatives and summatives and aligning and all of that. And I know, again, the collective feedback we're hearing from different places, that is still something teachers need the time to do. But it says only 9 are signed up. Like, how does that work? Could anybody take advantage of that? Is
So
it the
the-
train the trainer?
The 9 are the trainers, and then there's 200 seats available for the participants.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, we will make it, if 300 and all 350 want to show up, we'll figure out a way to make it happen. It's just a challenge anytime you hit August with people's vacations, lives, et cetera, trying to get everybody. We've always offered something in the summer technology-wise, so we've expanded that and added, again, hearing from staff wanting more information on a number of topics, not only just grading, but also the dignity standards and designing their performance tasks and things during, so that it's all part of getting sort of the information you need to start the year off feeling confident. I mean, really, that's what we're looking to do. We're not creating anything new. We're not bringing in anything they haven't seen already. It's just more of a, like anything, once you do something a little, you were like, oh, okay, wait a minute. Now I understand what you were talking about last year. So could I get the training again? And that's really what we're looking to do.
Everybody else? Anybody else? Okay, second reading, and so that means we'll see this Monday night to approve?
Yep, these will be approved Monday night, and then we'll get contracts out to folks and finalize. We're still trying to get some names for some. Again, people are checking schedules and want to make sure it's approved before they fully commit and all that kind of stuff, but.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. The next agenda item then is the 2022-23 additional textbook and instructional material requests. First reading, Mr. Agardine again.
All right, so this looks a whole lot more than it really is. What this is, the bulk of each year, our chairs sit down with the bookstore managers at North and South Campus and review where things are with textbooks. And if you recall the last couple years, and we talked about this also in January and February, there's been quite a shift from individual books to class sets, especially in areas where there's online opportunities. What the bookstore is saying is, hey, no one came to get these books, or people have been returning these books. So based on that information, then the chairs have gone back, and in some cases, they have made that shift. So a lot of those class sets, that's what that's all about. There are also a few of those areas where timing-wise, and in this case with the CompTIA PC repair and maintenance, that is always up to date because they take an industry standard test on how to do technology that's existing in our building right now. So that right now, the book is available and it has a price, but no one has seen the book yet because it's not been printed. And as you can see, that's something where it's not cheap, and also has with it all of the exercises and the, it's way more than exercises, but essentially it's sets up the conditions where you can practice, because you can't always just go into a high school like ours and play around with our network. So you do need those pieces sort of in a safe environment, so that's what a lot of that is. We've had a tremendous response to our Intro to Healthcare Careers, and in thinking through that course for the fall, our instructor really wants every kid to get a stethoscope and a lab coat. Stethoscope for hygiene purposes, you're not sharing those with other people, but in the lab coat really to add that level of professionalism to the course. It's going to be really tremendous. With our alternative, there's some additional texts there. Our alternative English courses alternate each year. So there's basically an English 3 one year and English 4 another year, so that if a student is in alt for more than 1 year, they don't repeat. And if they're in for just 1 year, they're fine with that way. They wanted to align to some of the materials that are already there, so There Are No Children Here and A Lesson Before Dying are already being used in other courses. They are adding this book, The Freedom Writer's Diary, as a writing component, how a teacher and 150 teens used writing to change themselves and the world around them. So that'll be a component of that as well. The one that's throughout all of English as a consumable is this book, Uncharted Territory. This book is a reader and a thematic guide. What often happens in our English classes, particularly at North, is when you start reading novels, it takes a while to read novels. This book has thematic readings, poems, nonfiction, comics that fit around different themes, essays. And so in looking at it as an option for a number of our English courses, they felt it really sort of rounded out perspectives. So this is a book that will be looking to be adopted as well. This one, we will have class sets of this hard copy, but kids won't take those home. The teacher will be able to assign the readings through Canvas directly, so the kids can just get the poem or the story or however they would do it. So that's sort of the pricing model and why it's sort of set up the way it is. You'll see it's a class set in one section and then an enrollment in another. The other piece of that is that the book, that $35,000 is for a 6-year purchase. So I want to clarify with them exactly if that's $35,000 up front or if it's going to be over the course of 6 years. In either way, that's relatively inexpensive for an online access to a book and that teachers can assign. So the expense, while it says 50 cost per unit, it's more like $6 per kid per course. So that's a little more manageable. And then you'll also see the other books that are being dropped. But so that's really the proposal for this month. This is a first reading. These 2 books will be kept on display in the boardroom. Anyone can come and take a look at them. And then we will bring them back for a second reading, all of them, next month, and go from there. Any questions on any of the book requests?
Scott, I just had a couple questions. Did you mean on that, the uncharted territory, so there's class sets?
Mm-hmm.
And then the $50, that's not gonna, is that a cost to the student, or that's?
So the way that it's sort of written up as a proposal, the $50 is the total cost for that long of a time, for 6 years, to have access to 700 license versions, right? So we're looking at charging the student the $6 difference. I mean, really what it is $6.
Great, okay.
Yeah. I did want to clarify, though, and I'll have that answer by Monday night as well, if we're paying the full $35,000 up front, or if we pay as we go along for the 6 years. I'm guessing they want their money up front, but we'll I'll get that clarified for Monday night. That being said, and I'll also have the totals, but if you recall, we were below our average for textbooks this year to begin with, so it's certainly within what we've budgeted, and it's also something that's going to be used in multiple classes. So I'm confident that it'll be a very useful supplement.
And then did you, were you saying on the computer one, the PC repair, the 120, is that a hit to the student?
Yes. That is for the student, because they actually use all of it. I mean, it's expensive.
The students don't pay that, right?
Students pay that.
Students are paying that.
Students pay that.
Student fee.
That's like the biggest fee we've ever, have we?
No. When on some of our courses where they have multiple books, they add up over $100. So it's expensive, there's no doubt about it. But it's also something that they will use. I mean, if the district wants to pay for it, we can certainly look at that. This is a consumable. It's something that they are able to keep and take with them into, as long as it's still effectively used. Yeah, that's.
Is it something new then? I mean, or is it?
Brand new, like isn't even printed yet.
Right, and is it new to that course then too? Or was the course new as well?
No, just every 2 years, like this is the 11th edition, they update it every 2 years.
And so the book they had before, was it comparable in price?
It was similar. It was not quite as much, but it didn't include all of the assignments.
And when you're saying it's a consumable, is it more what I would consider a workbook, where you couldn't use?
A digital workbook.
A digital workbook that can't be shared across students?
Correct.
Okay, so that's why it's assigned to the student, okay.
Yeah.
Another question. When you said the textbooks, I think you were talking about the textbooks that were going away. That's the stuff we talked about a couple months back, is that right?
Well, we have not only class sets, which most were in the classroom to begin with and are now being moved to a class set. There's also those being dropped, which are for courses that are either no longer running or for which we've had on the books but nobody has used. So there's only 4 of those. Strengthening Family and Self for Adult Living, an Executive Functioning Blueprint for a Success book, which is now out of print, and they've moved in a different direction in the base courses. The Life English and Reading Mastery Choice, we couldn't even find an ISBN number for that. It's just not being used, but it's on the books, so to speak, so they wanted that to drop it. And then the Connecting Math Concepts for Life Math, they've gone in a different direction there too. So those are just, things that, for whatever reason, the paperwork hadn't been processed, so we're dropping them formally.
Got it. And the books that have no costs, I'm sorry if I missed this, the books, the class sets that you're adding that don't have costs, that's because we have them already?
Right, so we bought them for every student, and all we're going to do is keep the number that we need from our existing stock, and then sell the remainders if we can sell them. I mean, there are book wholesalers that will come and offer you pennies on the dollar, but they offer you something.
Gotcha.
And that uncharted territory text, so with that edition that comes out, they're paying for what's the lifespan of that?
Well, this will last, 6 years is the expectation, because that's how long.
Yeah, I know that, you said that for the digital. My guess is that, so they don't expect the text, even the hard copy would need to be updated.
No, this is a second edition already. And the way, when you look at a literary anthology, one of the things they have to do is pay the author. So they don't change a whole lot, because then they have to pay another author. But what you have are some modern readings and photo essays and just a wide range. I really encourage you to take a look at it. The themes are, there's a theme of education, and there are probably 40 different readings that go along the theme of education, and then it suggests that you use these along with books you might already have in your class, such as Walden or Frankenstein or Brave New World. So the part of the ancillary documents in the back is for the teacher, and the teacher sets come with it, are to say, hey, when you're doing Walden, it would probably be helpful for you to take a look at this story that's more modern but is a similar theme. So it's really set up to give the teachers an opportunity to make some older text more relevant, or to round out sort of the perspectives of a particular novel. One of them on Credo has more to do with people's beliefs about different things. They suggest you use it with Handmaid's Tale or The Crucible or Hamlet. So again, the author, who I actually, Karen Reno and I have gotten to know a little bit through a professional organization, has taught essentially AP classics and then brought in modern lit to support along the way. And that's really what the book is designed to do.
Okay, can I, one other question?
Yeah, sure.
Going back to that, because that PC repair, that 120 is kind of bugging me, and it's kind of sticking with me. If that, do we kind of forewarn, I wouldn't want to go and sign or pay for my books and then get kind of shocked at that. Do we forewarn or say anything in the description of the classes? Like, hey,
We have not with this one. We have with our woods classes where you buy your wood. But again, this was a change that was just made after the kids signed up. So, I mean, I can talk with Brian and see what some options we might have are, but
Yeah, like an additional fees are required or some
Yeah,
kind of way to
something.
give, yeah, to give.
I think it's a little bit of a slippery slope, because anyone can say my fees are too high, can the district pay for my consumables? And that's, I mean, when you kind of get into some of these, this is a unique course, and that's really part of the course. We also are, not that this means we should gouge people, we're not making a penny off of this, but our costs are extremely low for our textbooks. It's not uncommon in other schools, and we did a comparison, I think we shared this earlier in the year, if not it was the year before, where the fees are $500-600 just for textbooks, because they're buying every one of their books. We tend to buy the books and then loan them, which is a unique model that is not common anymore. I don't know, Brian, if you wanted to add anything to
Yeah, one of the things I was going to say was that the state of Illinois used to have a textbook grant program, and so a lot of the textbooks were purchased with that money through the state of Illinois. That no longer exists. So when that happened, a lot of districts had gone away from, as Scott pointed out, a nominal textbook fee to essentially having the students pay for all of their textbooks. So we are not there yet at all. So we're still kind of on that old model where we're buying the textbooks, although we're moving away from that older model in the sense of having those classroom assigned sets. So
Yeah, I love that textbook rental fee. I love that. I just, I guess when I take scuba or something, or if a kid takes scuba, they're expecting a certain fee for whatever the testing or whatever the thing is, or maybe with woods and there's specific ones. I just always think a heads up is.
Yeah, there's definitely, with this course, and the students who've signed up for it know, this is for an industry credential. And the students who get this credential, actually Ed Tennant requires them to have this credential to work with us here in the summers. So this, in fact, he'll often say that our students come in better prepared than people in off the street, right? So this is one of those sort of capstone experiences, and to take that CompTIA A+ exam is a major exam, and it's not done often in high school. So this is a unique 2LT kind of experience.
How many of those students then with that credential or who take that course work for us?
Now, how many do you hire, Ed? We hired 16 last summer.
Maybe that's an incentive to be reimbursed for the book.
Yeah, I mean, they have to pass not only do they have to pass the A+ test, but in order to work here, they have to pass Ed's test. He puts them through a literal test, so to see if they know what they do, so they don't mess up the system.
Yeah, I just think that might be a nice incentive.
I mean, we can certainly let people know. I mean, if anyone's on fee waiver, things are covered anyway. I mean, we don't
Right.
gouge anyone.
Right.
But again, there are certain courses where this is just kind of the way the course works. I mean,
But it's a good point to bring up, and if there's any other courses where that's something that happens or movement toward that, if that starts to become a thing. I can't say if I know that in the past we've had situations where we've had a textbook that's been pricey and we haven't notified anybody. I can't, this is the first one that's kind of come up to me too, so. But it's something that we definitely want to make sure that if that continues to happen or we have more of that, we should make an attempt to
Well,
notify.
between now and next Monday, I'll definitely talk to the instructor and see where he is with it. I mean, this is actually the cheapest of the 3 routes that you can go with this book. One of them is to not have the online homework platform, which is actually, I think you would, I don't know if that would be wise, again, because it sets up the conditions where you can actually do the work of the course and not have to either mess with our own network, or in the past, what we've done is set up a separate network, like just in that classroom, that they can play around with. But that's been difficult equipment-wise as well, to have state-of-the-art equipment where you can create a network which you can then manipulate, which, again, this is pretty unique stuff.
And I'm not questioning what book to use, because I know nothing about that. I'm just saying, I think we need to give a heads up to to the families that are getting hit with those costs. Because, you know, if, I would just look at it and I'd want a heads up so that if they were on the fence, maybe they would.
Sure.
Take a cheaper class.
Can I ask one clarifying question about that before we move on? Do they actually get certified? If they do this class, do they have to pay for their own certification? Or do they take the certification test through the class and become certified through taking the class?
I would have to double check on if they're, I don't recall if they pay for the test or if we do. So I can find that out.
Okay. Because certainly if they get certified through this class, that seems like that's, you know, probably a bargain.
Right.
And then back to the uncharted territory, just to make sure I understood, that $35,000 is a fee that will be to the district for a 6-year digital license of the text.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay. Do we have, I mean, that seems very extreme to pay for 6 years up front of a digital license. It looks like the second edition came out under 5 years after the first edition. So to pay upfront for 6 years, and also it being a new text that's just being used, do we have other licenses that we're paying that far in advance? I mean, I've always heard of like 3 years at most, so 6 seems pretty extreme to me.
We, in order to get a lower price, you can do 6. I can talk to our rep if you're not comfortable with that. I'll also find out to see if, if that's all up front or not. This is Norton. They are one of the biggest school publishers. So one of the things that we have learned in the realm of textbooks over the last 10 years is online pricing theories change all the time. So that being said, we're not looking to get this book for just one class. It's for a number of classes. So in that sense, I think we'll more than get the use out of it, but I can certainly follow up with our rep and see what it would cost to go year by year. It'll cost more, but we can find out what that cost would be. And I can bring that back Monday as well.
I just have one quick process question. I've spent so many minutes on page 73 of the materials on the PC repair and maintenance course. Just from a process perspective, it seems to be the only one that doesn't have, signatures prior to yours, Scott, in terms of the division chair, assistant division chair, or teacher. And there is a box for recommend or do not recommend, so we don't have, I'm sure they're on board with it, but what was provided to the board doesn't demonstrate that. Could that be updated for
That
Monday?
was provided to me within minutes of getting it to Marilyn.
Okay, so for Monday,
Because
before we're asked to vote, could we?
it was so new. I mean,
Okay.
literally, they got an ISBN number the day that this was due to Marilyn.
Okay, so for Monday, though, could we see a form that shows
I
support
can do
from the
that, yes.
folks more directly involved?
Mm-hmm.
Just from, again, procedural, I don't question that they would say, we don't want this version, or we don't want
Sure.
this, but it's not clear in what's been presented. Thank you.
And I just have one question to ask. So Allison, I think it was you that was saying about the fee. Was it you? It's so hard to see you down there. Hey. So do we want to make it a rule that if any class has like, do we want to put a threshold dollar amount on it? Or do we want to say any class that has an extra cost, that fee will be, put on there? 'Cause I don't want to have it be one that's $20 and one that's $120 and have that be a decision. So my suggestion would be, I think it's good to disclose that, but I'd like it to be disclosed for all classes, not just what we arbitrarily think would be a significant price.
Well, it's every class, though, if you get into an English class, you're going to have, a group of books. You might
Right.
have 5 books that are $7 each. So I think it would be, that's a big work to be
Right, so what,
disclosing every
but I think we need more
$6
definition
charge.
on that, though. Are we
Yeah.
over $50? Are we over
I think,
75?
as with anything, it always becomes more complex than just putting a threshold on it. So why don't administratively, we go back and look at this and see if there's a threshold, or we need to see what we're doing currently. So it's not as easy as just saying, let's decide
I
on the amount.
appreciate that. I just think
Let us think about that. And that's kind of what we do, like whether it's our academic program guide or the way we communicate on courses through the course selection process. Like, we communicate for the reasons outlined, So let's give us some time to work on this.
Just some definition around it,
Yeah.
just, okay, perfect, thank you.
And maybe that bigger discussion too just comes down to, keeping an eye, and I know that you do this, keeping an eye on what the percentage increases to our students are overall in their student fees every year. So, I know we probably try to keep it to a certain level.
Generally speaking, we've not raised our fees. In fact,
Okay,
last year when we added the technology fee,
right.
I think that was the first additional fee that we had probably in, 10 years,
Was it
maybe
that
15
long?
years,
I knew it
maybe
was a lot,
somewhere in that area. So the only, beside the district fees, the only additional ones typically you would see, that were kind of mentioned here, would be any of the consumable novels for the English courses. That's pretty common. We don't have a ton of other courses that have really additional fees in them. But
Exorbitant
as
fees, yeah.
Dr. Waterman pointed out, we can certainly look at those and bring those back and tell you what they are and
Yeah.
get a threshold.
And this
for those.
one's certainly unique too, because it came about after students signed up for the course. So traditionally, they're going to know that information. And then obviously through the OLR process, they learn what fees are associated. That's going May and June. But certainly it's something administratively, this is something we can look at.
Okay. So you'll get back with us some information on Monday night? Great. Anybody else? Excellent. Okay. Let's move on then with the next item, which is the 2022-2023 summer reading list. Scott Eggerding.
Thank you. So what you have before you are 3 lists. The first is the LT summer reading list for pretty much all of our students, with the exception of the 2 lists that come after for the 2 AP courses. As in previous years, we have a committee of folks that get together to review possible texts, including our librarians and English teachers and students. They'd like to have a wide range, so some classics as well as some newer books. They're also looking to provide nonfiction as well as fiction. The goal being that students choose a book and read one over the summer, and then there's an activity at the beginning of the year where they can share what they saw from their particular book. You'll note that some are bestsellers, some are, The Grapes of Wrath. I am interested to see who picks that one up. Having taught that for years, it's a great book, but it's not exactly a beach read, but it's on there. And also things that I know are super popular right now, Where the Crawdads Sing, for example. And as I went through each of these titles, a number of them are the first book of a trilogy or of a series. And so we probably have some students who've already read the whole series, right? So they may not pick that one, but others might read a book and go, oh, that's really cool, I'm going to read the next one. That's that kind of thing. So really wide range of options for students. As Karen Reno, who sent this forward, explained, there are book trailers they're putting on the website to make book selection easier so the kids can get a sense of what the book is all about. They've got posters they're putting together. In May, the English teachers will be promoting the books and talking about them, doing some book talks. We'll have the bookstore displays. Barnes & Noble has always been a great partner. They'll put a whole table just with the books for our summer read. So they'll do that again too. That'll be for those who want that tangible book, and then others will just want to grab something as an ebook. So In any case, the goal isn't to make this the first grade of the year. It's to read over the summer and share what you read as you get to know your English teacher and your English class. So the other two lists are for the two AP courses, and the expectation there is that they choose one of these books because not only are these books often recommended to have been read for the AP test, and that there may be some reference to them, or they would have the opportunity to use their book to write one of their longer writing passages. It also, the themes fit with the themes of the courses. So these are also mostly very well-known books as well. And so, again, none of them are required of any single student, so they are not required to be approved in our normal process. This is an information item, and certainly would take any feedback you might have, and I would share it with Ms. Reno.
I love how the committee, I remember this from last year, they do such a good job of publicizing it. Karen Reno does a great job of, and all the teachers of doing the summaries of all the books, and I loved that last year, and I loved how many, reminders we got. I thought that was really helpful, getting into the summer and everything, so that was awesome. It's really helpful.
It's a highlight of the spring agenda each year. I totally concur, and I appreciate student voice in particular. If you'd share that feedback with Karen, I think it's so relevant to take into account what our young people want to read. And I couldn't wait for the synopsis or the background. I went and looked them all up and found about 6 or 7 that I've added to my own summer list. So thank you for that as well, on a personal note.
Yep.
Yeah, I think Karen shared with us last year about the student involvement. That was pretty awesome. And, it's, and I too feel the same way. I always look forward to the list because that's how I determine what I'm going to read over the summer. Thanks. Anyone else? Okay, that moves us on then to the next item, which is our grading practices update. Sticking with you, Scott Agerney.
All right, let me see if I can plug in here. It's my understanding the one behind me works, so I assume it's working.
Hard to read again.
These are all the slides that are in your packet.
Yeah, okay. Great.
So when we spoke in February, we shared a couple of presentations from some teachers as well as sort of where we were in our grading process. And from that, there were a number of questions that this committee had, and in sort of following up with Brian, wanted to share these 3 in particular today. I mean, I think we could talk grading pretty much every meeting if we wanted to, and I'm certainly always interested in talking about this topic. So the 3 big questions that we're going to be tackling tonight, or that I'll be sharing some information on first, because we've gone out and found information to share with all of you here, are these 3. What are other high schools doing with changes to grading practices? How do colleges view changes to grading practices? And how are we involving and supporting teachers with the implementation of grading practices? So obviously there were many questions asked last time. We can certainly, I wanted to narrow these down because I think some of the questions that were asked are answered in what other people are doing and what some colleges are doing. So with that, we'll just go ahead and get started. The first one, what are other high schools doing with changes to grading practices? I sent a survey out to CADCA. CADCA is a group of assistant superintendents and directors, the curriculum and assessment directors of the Chicagoland area. We get together monthly to talk about, you name it, from state requirements to topics like this. When we're all together, we represent about 300 high schools serving 400,000 students. When I sent out the survey, we didn't get quite everybody, but we never do. That being said, we did get the administrators from all the schools in the packet here respond to the survey. So you'll probably recognize many, if not all of them. Some of them maybe not. Some are a little further out. Some are a little smaller. So your Grants and your Richmond Burtons, or maybe not be the first schools you think of. But then we certainly have schools that we always like to compare ourselves with. There's also a smaller group of CAD, we call ourselves small CADCA. There's like 8 of us. We meet every Friday. And that's really a group, we're very similar in size and with expectations. So a lot of times I'll know more information about them, and that would be Downers, Wheaton, Glenbard, Lake Park, Addison Trail, Willowbrook, and Fenton. We tend to get together and and that's an interesting mix because there's another split campus school there and some larger and some unit, and Maine also is a part of that group. So that being said, we have lots of conversation about many, many topics. You'll also notice, and there's a little note here too, that some of them are part of unit districts. So unit districts are coordinating both K-8 and 9-12. So sometimes their answers are a little different, and there's one place in particular where I'll point that out. But as far as the high schools go, these are the ones that responded. Of those schools, 91% of them in their high schools say that they have a common grading scale. What that means is 9% of those schools you just saw don't have a common scale. Teachers can make up their own, or they have multiples. We would say that we have a common scale, right? So partly because of how, and you'll see that more in a little bit, 46% uses 0 to 100, 54% use some kind of a whole grade. So an A to F, a 0 to 5, 1 to 4. Some will translate that 0 to 5 or 1 to 4 into a 50 to 100, and a couple of them went with 40 to 100 so that they could make sure that if you didn't turn in something, you got a lower grade. Doesn't fit with what we've been talking about philosophically, but that is what some schools have done. So when you're wondering why 40, it's a balance of that.
With that, does that just mean the whole grade mean not the pluses and minuses?
Correct.
Because they're still using the percentages, but it's just not, they're using
So it really depends.
You just can't get lower than a 50.
Right, you can't get lower than a 50 on a 50 to 100. Some will include pluses and minuses, some will not, no matter what it is. So if it's a 90 to 100, it's an A with no plus or minus. Some have plus or minus. So I did ask that question, and there were very few who have plus and minus, and even fewer that then report that on their transcripts. Right. Again, we report our transcript does not include the plus or minus as a weight. It doesn't change your GPA, but we do include the plus or minus on our transcript.
And I assume you appreciate little questions along the way?
Mm-hmm.
Is that fine? Okay. You said at LT you would say we have a common scale.
Mm-hmm.
Is aside from the A through F pilot courses or courses that have moved to that method, which of these many scales on the slide do we use?
We use 0 to 100. We do
0
have
to
a
100.
couple that are doing 50 to 100, but our common scale is 0 to 100. They've just made a decision as a team not to give any points fewer than 50.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That number thing has been interesting to me. I have heard of a lot of other districts that are using the numbers, and so I was trying to get used to that vernacular. I've had people say I'm getting, a 1 or a 4, and obviously
Right.
those wouldn't use the plus or minus either.
Right.
They're getting like a 1 plus.
Right, because when you're in the whole grade system, you have a description of what each threshold looks like, and there isn't you kind of got it or you got it a lot better than someone else. It's like you're there or you're not, and
Right.
so there is no plus minus. You're a 4, 3, 2, 1, or a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What I found interesting is the 0 to 100 is not the average anymore. It's a little below average. When talking about standards-based grading, and again, there are many ways to define standards-based grading. Only 44% of those schools surveyed say no, they don't use it, or they aren't considering moving there in the next 5 years. So on the left side, you have 19% saying yes, we do have a standards-based grading scale. 16% are in the process of moving there, and 21% are sort of in the other category, which means they have either have multiple pilots or multiple versions going on, or as you'll see in a minute, they don't have anything consistent in their school. And so they can't say some are, some aren't, they don't have a system to it, and they're not doing it. So you'll see that in the next slide. We would probably be in that other category, partly because we're not using standards. We are measuring toward skills and outcomes. They are linked to standards, but when you look at the schools that are using standards-based grading, the national standard, state standard is what is graded. So the grading would be whatever the social studies standard is. It wouldn't be how we might have interpreted it to be a DBQ. It would be much more the specific thing that's listed in that standard. So we're not in that standards-based camp. That being said, we are looking at specific skills and outcomes. What I found interesting here is that how they know and not doing anything in this realm is the smallest group, as 44%, that they're either people have already made a change, they're experimenting with things, or they plan to be there in 5 years.
But again, aside from the A through F pilot, today we are in the no answer.
We would be in the other.
We'd be in other. So even our 0 to 100 scale, kind of standard, old-fashioned grading, if you will, is using skills and outcomes?
Yes, and it's
Okay.
doing it with formative and summative assessments. So
Okay.
what you'll have with the no's is not only, and you'll see that in a minute, not only are teams not consistent in some schools, even the teachers within teams are not consistent, and that's really where we were in 2016.
Okay.
We would have been a no in 2016. We made some pretty significant changes and removed some things out of what counts in a grade, which isn't necessarily what's happened at other places.
I just want to be clear, this is of, the data that we're looking at is the data that you obtained from the survey, from those that answered the survey.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, from those high schools listed
Okay.
earlier in the presentation, right. So when you get into the question of consistency, how consistent are your high school grading practices with a common grading scale in the entire building? 78% of them have a common grading scale for their entire building. So that means that in some of them, there's opportunities for some variability there, certainly. When you go into our Infinite Campus, you do have two choices. You have the A to F pilot, and then you have the 0 to 100. So again, I would see that at the A to F as a pilot, but in any case, we're looking at 78% have the same throughout the whole building. The common grading scale on a course team I thought was curious. 88% said they do, which means about 12% mean even on the same course team, they don't have the same grading scale. So that means that if Jen and I are teaching the same course, I'm going 0 to 100, she's going 40 to 100, and then Ed, he's doing 50 to 100. That's allowable in 12% of those schools of the same course. This is something we were doing 6 years ago, and that was one of the things that our students came to us and said, I want him as a teacher because I like his scale better. Right? And he's awesome, he says. Common grading practices on a course team. Now, this is common grading practices, so that is whether you're counting late work or allowing for retakes or giving extra credit. Only 69% of the schools surveyed said that they have common grading practices on a course team. We are 100% common grading practices on course teams. Our course teams have determined that they are consistent across the board. Now, if it's not happening, that's a teacher who's chosen not to go along with the team. But we are, and we state, and we have common syllabi and common maps and common grading practices across all course teams. even with the A to F pilot versus the others, they're all consistent by team.
Then how does that, like, kind of the quality control along the way, right? So when we get feedback, like, but it's not consistent and all of that, is that, like, the team lead for the teachers? Like, how do we make sure that we get there?
Sure, so that's something actually that Jen's been working with the chairs on this year with regard to reviewing grade books, and not only reviewing the grade books, but also, having that consistency check with the curriculum coordinators. They've been involved in that as well. So that's something we've added this particular year in order to make sure that we are being consistent across the board.
And then where are those checkpoints along the way?
Right now, Jill, we're in the middle of a grade book audit right now, and our curriculum coordinators are working on auditing larger scale curriculum maps, but our chairs are now taking time to go into grade books and auditing those grade books to make sure that we are following our grading philosophy, and then also that there's consistency across the team. So if we do see spots, and we don't anticipate many, if any, but if there are spots, then those would be conversations between the chair and the teacher to kind of discern where there's that inconsistency and where that's coming from.
Okay. And then that'll be carried forward, will there be audits on a regular basis, once a year, every semester?
We have not talked about how often we'll do that. It's a time-consuming process. We're working with our tech department to get some of that information out of Infinite Campus, but then there's also a level of division chair going into those grade books as well, but it should be something that we implement on a regular basis for sure.
Well, maybe depending on what comes out of this first wave. Right?
Yeah, and we're still having those conversations. We're looking at those audits right now and hope within the next couple of weeks that we're able, as a division leadership team, to be able to dig in a little bit and see kind of where we're at across the board.
I think we would love to hear the other side of that, like how everything comes together. I mean, well, I shouldn't say we. I would be curious, because then it goes to, like, the summer workshops we were talking about, right? Like, how many people are taking advantage of some of those opportunities to come back together and align along the way? So I'd be curious.
And really, we made some changes at the semester, and so this gives us an opportunity to just take a look and have conversations about those changes that we made, in January for this semester. So feeling good about our progress thus far, and we'll continue the conversations as we move through the semester.
Right, so I think I would echo what Jill is saying, is that hopefully we can be able to see how that audit has progressed, because I know that the main part of this move was about consistency, and when we still have a number of areas that aren't consistent, and even within divisions, that doesn't help the overall story.
Yeah, I think this is our way to make sure that there is consistency, especially within teams. And you're right, Michael, within divisions, there is not necessarily consistency. It's within those teams that we are hoping for that consistency right now. But certainly we can take a look at that moving forward.
I think, too, just to be clear, we're not anticipating finding large levels of inconsistencies. Our teachers are doing a fantastic job of implementing this. We do know from time to time we will come across an inconsistency of a grading practice or within a grade book, but we don't, through the grade book audit process, we don't anticipate finding a ton of examples of inconsistencies among course teams. Now, certainly across course teams and among divisions, absolutely, but not among course teams.
And it gives us, to Dr. Waterman's point, it gives us a great opportunity then to continue to talk about support, the support that we're providing. If some teams are having trouble, implementing different types of assessments, then we can work with those teams. We're already working on a summer workshop within one area, right, to broaden the scope of the types of assessments that we're using. So we're also garnering the information so that we can provide the appropriate levels of support. I didn't mention this when Scott was talking about the summer workshops and the summer professional week. There's a lot of great workshops that are going to be facilitated that week, and I think hopefully, right, we have a lot of staff members who participate, but if not, we're going to have a lot of great workshops that we can utilize throughout the course of next year in support of implementing our overall grading philosophy and supporting our teachers as well.
Oh, I was just going to ask about the workshops, and it kind of depends. Is that ever a situation where something could be recorded and it could be a module online or something like that? Because we were talking about it can be a challenge to get teachers to come back, vacations, schedules, all that stuff. I don't know if if those types of workshops lend themselves to that, but yeah, okay.
Something certainly we can look at which ones might lend themselves to that type of format.
Yeah, I'm glad, Jen, you just hit upon what was going to be my question is like auditing the grade books in what fashion? Like what metrics are you applying to understand if this is a course team that is truly consistent or is this a course team that has some consistency? So in my mind, I'm picturing, looking at the grade books and seeing this amount of assessments here and another teacher has this amount of assessments. Well, certainly, that would probably raise some flags, but what you said, which I think is super important, and I want to check in on this, is what type of assessments you're seeing. And to that is a question, are the teachers for each course team, have there been clear expectations given for what should be seen in those so that you're not seeing the same type of like quiz counting as a summative that's the same, that's the same, that's the same, that's the same, that's the same?
Yeah, I think, well, one of the changes that we made at the semester is calling for multiple types of assessments. Now, that looks different in some social studies classes than it does in some math classes. So math is an area where we're really looking at two main types of assessment right now. And certainly we're going to do some work and hopefully we will get more diverse in terms of the types of assessments within the math area, but we're using tests and quizzes. In social studies, for example, in some of our social studies courses, and these are courses where our students have raved about the types of assessments that our teachers are using, you go into a grade book and you're going to see potentially a traditional summative assessment, a written response, a Socratic seminar discussion. And that's our hope, right? Our hope is across the board in time, and this is a big lift, that we're able to diversify and give kids multiple ways to show their learning of essential outcomes, skills, and content in courses. So exactly, Dawn, we're looking at types of assessments, we're also looking at number of assessments, and then type of feedback that's provided in the grade book as well. So there should be summatives in the grade book, and there should also be information reported through formatives as well. So all that information is information that our chairs are digging into right now. Thank you.
Jen, how long do you expect the audit to take? Was that going to take you through the rest of the year to review this information?
We should have some initial information. All of our chairs should be done with their initial review in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll figure out the best way to compile all of that information. So it might take us through the rest of the semester, but we're getting some good information that we can apply right now and then apply later as well. Kind of a general vague answer, but hopefully we get our first wave of info in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll take a look.
Okay. Thank you.
Then just the last item on this page, page 8, the common grading practices across the whole building, you'll see is not a very high number. One of the things we found too is if you are where you want to be in your grading practices, you are certainly more common. I would say, as far as how I would answer this question, our grading practices with the 6 fixes is very common. With the use of retakes is very common. What we have as far as the changes were some things we deliberately left open-ended to teachers, and that is you need to complete the majority of the formatives in order to qualify for a retake on a summative. We didn't say 4 or 2 or half. We left the teams up to some discretion there because it depends on the team. And some courses, it's harder to do some of those things than others. So again, we've got, like you said, we talked about this computer class, very different from a traditional math class, very different from a PE class. So we wanted to give the teams some autonomy in making the decision so that the student has the best opportunity to demonstrate their learning. That being said, I'm not surprised that this is the lowest, and it is one of the biggest challenges, especially when there's a shift made, like here at LT 6 years ago, when things were pretty much left up to the teacher to grade however they wanted. And to some degree, the pushback we've gotten from some teachers has been that specifically. And we've also heard too, by having teaching teams be consistent, we have had some teachers who have been more further down the line as far as giving more feedback and grading a particular way, had to scale back because the team wasn't ready to go there, right? So just because a team isn't consistent, this isn't necessarily the right solution either. If the reason why you're consistent is because 3 of the 4 teachers don't believe in whatever the thing is that the other teacher was doing. So that was actually, for retakes, that would have been an example. Until we mandated retakes, it was up to each team, and some teams did, some teams didn't. Some teams allowed you to retake 2 times, and that's it. So once we made that a consistent rule, that was then something that the teams no longer made a decision on.
So this is that 22% of those that were surveyed that responded said that their entire building has like a lockstep
Correct.
follow.
Common
everything's very
practices all the way
consistent.
across. Those tend to be your standards-based schools,
Okay.
because everything is aligned to the standard, and a lot of the philosophy of that is with the retakes, and you're having multiple measures of the same, of fewer outcomes of those fewer skills. So
Would that be more consistent with like a unit district versus?
it could be. We did specifically say, how consistent are your high school grading practices because of that? And that was one of the examples, thanks for reminding me of that, is that we wanted to make sure that we weren't including second grade, third grade in this data. So this is high school only.
Okay.
And just to be clear, LT is not consistent across the whole building because English can weight things differently than PE? Or would you say we are consistent?
I wouldn't say we are common grading practices across the whole building, although we are consistent with our 6 fixes and with our retake policy, right?
Okay, so if you answered your own survey, you would say no on
Right
behalf of
now, I
LT.
would say we are not as consistent as we could be, right? Correct.
Okay, but the goal is to be more consistent.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's been all along. That's been one of the reasons why we made the change in the first place, because of the wild inconsistency. We are much more consistent than most teams, most schools, because we have school-wide the 6 fixes and the retake policy. So the next was a number of questions about assessments. And it's really summarized here because this is where you really see a departure, in that people have all sorts of different directions of how they're doing assessments and how they're counting things. Of those, again, this is also of high schools, 14% count formatives as no part of the grade. 29% count them as up to 10% or 10%. Some it says up to, some is 10. 21% count as 20% or up to 20%. So in some cases, they'll allow them to be 10% on some teams, 20 on others, but no more than 20%. And then the 29% is the same sort of variance up to a 30%. So kind of a wide range of where formatives are. As far as the summatives, you'll notice, though, the 29% count summatives as 100% of the grade, when it said 14% count them as 0. Standards-based schools don't have formatives. They just keep measuring the same outcomes as part of that summative. So those who are standards-based and those who have formatives that count as 0 would be the ones who would say 29% count as 100% of the grade. So you don't have a practice in some standards-based systems. So that's the O in the bottom right. Some schools are standards-based, so they don't count points or percentages. They also have very few outcomes that they're measuring throughout the semester. So they might get measured 7 or 8 times, and there's some really interesting calculations on how that works. It's much more complicated than the system that we use. So that's why the numbers don't add up. But the remainder of those schools range from 60% to 95%, or don't have a set percentage. So again, if your school doesn't dictate, as we did, 80, with the summatives, then they have a wide variance. We also asked about exams. 46% have eliminated final exams. 23% have final exams that can count as another summative, so it's sort of an extra summative, which I don't understand, but it is what they do. And then 31% allow the final exam to count up to 20% of the grade. So you have 80% of your grade is your formatives and summatives, and then 20% of your grade is your final exam. So a third of the schools are doing that, roughly, 31%. Some schools, and this is part of that other group, they allow a department to determine the weights. So that's where that range is, can count no more as 30%, but math does it one way, English does it another way, social studies does it another way. Others have replaced final exams with mastery exams, or what we've been calling no-harm finals, which means you can only improve your grade by taking that final. And it would go back and fix the previous or add to the previous summative, as opposed to being a new score. So assessment is all over the place in looking at the different schools.
So Scott, when we look at this, and in previous conversations, it has felt, and again, I can't speak for everybody, but it's felt to me that it's really, when we move into this grading policy, it really has felt all or nothing. Like it has to just be summatives only, and that's the way to go as we, hear feedback from parents and students and teachers. So, but my takeaway here is there are a few different ways. I mean, there are many different ways that you can still get to the skills and outcomes piece of it and consistency, but also maybe shift the weight around a little bit. And I would just be curious if conversation has happened along those lines, like if that's being considered, what would the data points have to be to consider shifting things around?
So one of the questions we asked later is, what has been one of your biggest challenges in making your changes to grading practices? Many of them said, we wish we would not have started with 10 or 20% for formatives and gone straight to summatives, because it's created sort of a horse trading of points again. And so they never got away from what was one of the challenges before of, are you getting any feedback on your practice? Are you, the things that we decided not to do points for. So there are schools that are doing this, counting it as 10% of the grade, that wish they hadn't done that and wish they had gone to zero. There are others for whom they did it because they knew that their community would be able to stomach some of the other things better by giving the points. And so they decided not to have the argument and just give the points. So it's kind of all over the place as to why that is that way. We went with this model, and in reading what, people wishing they would have done that, and finding out other ways to value those practice, homework, et cetera. I think there's another way to do it that we haven't initiated yet, and that's partly because of the pandemic, and that would have been our process marks, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But we're not providing that information now, and it sounds like that's information people want. We certainly, as we went into the pandemic, prior to the pandemic, our goal was to have process marks, which would talk about whether or not you're turning in your work and whether or not, those skills that ultimately I'm gonna call our portrait of a graduate sort of outcomes. Those are things we value as well, but we're not measuring right now. And so the question is, does the grade actually, is it a better grade if you include those things in there, but you're unable to tell where they are? For example, the reason why I have the grade I have is because I'm a good citizen and I'm on time and I turn all my work in? Or are we separating the grade so that the grade is a measure of what's learned, and then we provide additional information for those soft skills and for those other pieces? I would advocate for that rather than having a discussion about adding 10% for homework or that sort of thing. I think more information, keeping things separate would be better. But again, that was the reason why we went the direction that we did. But that's a very good point. I mean, you know, there's no doubt about it, there are people who do that.
It's, oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, it was the most significant decision we made in spring of 2020 was about process marks. And it really, it's a double-edged sword of we know the lift that that's gonna require of teachers. We also know how important it is. And so the last couple of years, when we've revisited that decision, we've consistently said, let's wait. But eventually, we're gonna have to do that work because it is important.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and the process marks will be good to communicate, but I think one of the big pain points right now, and let me backtrack by saying, there's so much of the grading system that I think is phenomenal, and they're the right things. There's some of the consistencies that have been made that definitely should have been made. Like, you never want to hear a student at LTHS say, you know, I'm encumbered because my teacher chose not to give extra credit, or my teacher chose not to allow retakes, when my friend who has the different teacher has the opportunity for extra credit and retakes. So clearly that needed to change, and I applaud that. It makes all the sense in the world. I think one of the pain points, though, and to Jill's question, because she asked for the pivot points on how we would know when it's time to look at this. One of the pain points is understanding that some of that formative work is critical to the learning process. And not only critical to the learning process, but I mean, I know several years back, you all spent a lot of time really working with the teachers to make sure that the work that was assigned was highly valued, critical work to the learning process. And I know it all relates to you know, motivation and the students doing the work, but I think we have to own up to the fact that we've got 14-year-olds that are coming to this institution that may not have the most mature mindset about learning and about how to be a good student and what that looks like. And some of what our teachers do is to help them learn how to be a good student, and all the things that go along with that can be critical. You mentioned that there were schools that said that they wish they hadn't started with points. I know of other schools that that went to 0 and then added points back in for the formatives because of learning along the way, because of input from teachers and students and parents, that there was some compromise in the learning process. So I think, to Jill's point, she asked for the pivot points of how we would know when and if that needed to be assessed. So I'm curious if you have any input about that.
I really haven't considered pivot points. I mean, we can certainly look at those. I mean, we've been looking to make sure that our students have an opportunity to demonstrate learning, right? That's the whole point all along the way. The challenge with giving points for formatives has everything to do with the consistency as well. So if you're not able to redo something, if you are dealing with something in your personal life and you're not able to get the homework turned in and it's worth 10%, you get that 0, that's not showing that you've learned anything, and it's really not teaching you how to be a better student. It's punishing you for having a difficult day. In that sense, you can make up that work when it's not worth something as far as points are concerned, but you know that you need to make up that work in order to qualify for a retake through the summative, and you as a student have more of a way to get out of your hole. One of the things that we were finding, and in my work prior to being in administration, working particularly with students who struggle, for many of them within that first quarter, they had dug themselves holes they could never get out of. And that 10% or whatever it was 0 or next to 0, and there was no hope and there was no way to go forward. And in making these shifts, kids have options. And not only do they have those options, but you know, if they don't do the homework and they don't do the formatives, they will not do as well in the summatives. That's a given. We made that change to second semester to incentivize the homework, the formatives more. But what we had found in our research 6 years ago as well was only half of our teachers were even looking at homework. So a kid was doing homework and getting credit for homework, but was getting no feedback and had no idea if they were doing it right. They were just doing it and getting points. That doesn't fit our philosophy of a grade being a measure of what's learned. That was again, that's why we had the process marks component. So to your question of what are the pivot points of when we would consider to add points, I would have to give that some real deep thought because it changes our entire philosophy.
And I see that, and I'm not, I completely 1,000,000% agree that, that this approach gives more opportunities for kids to demonstrate their learning if, in fact, they have had a bad day, or if they've, had a bad day and it caused the bad test. I guess the concern is, and what we keep hearing from teachers, from parents, and from students, is that the learning process has been compromised potentially along the way. That by the time they get to that summative, even with doing the homework, so they're still doing the homework, they're still checking the box, well, now I can take the test. But if they didn't do that homework along the way, because they didn't have to, or even because they prioritized other things, they didn't encounter the learning along the way. They probably didn't have as much touch points. The teacher probably didn't have as much touch points to understand, hey, this kid is struggling, like we need to figure it out, even if the child is not mature enough to come forward. So I think that's, if I boil down to it, and to the point of we're seeing things that are done very differently, should the students that completely blew off the homework all semester and they can't dig out of the hole, should there be a way for them to demonstrate learning and to help them along? Absolutely. Should the students who are in that small section of people that are students that can completely, not do the homework at all and still come in and take the test and score an A in the test, should they get that A? Yes, because they demonstrated learning. But is there a middle ground? Is there a middle ground to make the learning process towards the summative mean a little bit more, hard work mean a little bit more, kids that have executive functioning issues? I'm curious about our special education kids. It's still just, we're seeing in this data, which is 48 schools out of 300, some variation, and some ways where apparently districts have looked out to their students, looked out to their staff, and realized we can still accomplish consistencies, we can still accomplish a strong understanding that our grades reflect the learning, and make some variations. And that's kind of my point, is I think we're on the process, we've already made some variations, I just don't want to miss too many kids and have problems with students who did have not as good of a learning experience along the way, and have them kind of suffer through our learning process with that. My 2 cents.
Yeah, I think the worst thing we can do, and I would love, frankly, and I'm not kidding, I would love to talk about grading at every meeting, because I think it's about, we all who ran campaigns ran and talked about grading. It's in our emails every month. I don't think we're there, and when I hear we haven't considered pain points, it comes off to me as sounding rigid and myopic, and this is the way it's going to be. And I think you've already demonstrated that you as a team take feedback. You made a lot of changes at the semester, and I think I would encourage a mindset that continues to take in input and hear teacher voices. Again, I read a lot of comments from the LTEA materials that were supplied that made my jaw drop. I don't know that teachers are being heard, and I haven't heard from anyone that, besides Jen, you're mentioning that you're working on some of these audits, but we hear it in the community. I hear it when I walk outside, and it's a huge issue. And when you show that 79, I appreciate the survey and the data, I'm not hearing if there were any aha moments or any, we might think about that. And if I have someone ask me, what did you learn about formatives? 79% do count formatives as part of the grade. And, well, what did they say? They said, well, they had different reasons. They wish they wouldn't. And it doesn't jump off the page. If this had said, all of these other schools are all doing what we're doing, there's a little more kind of weight behind it. So are we being leaders in this? Should we be leaders? I was at the LTCAC meeting before the pandemic when this was laid out, and I remember asking, wow, how are you going to get teacher buy-in? And wow, things, to your point, Scott, things were really disjointed and inconsistent across teams. And same grades, you'd get an A in this class, or if you had that teacher, you'd get a C. And there were the points and some of these ancillary things. I don't know, I'd like to know about and I know I'm jumping all over, but with A through F included, what's the timeline? What's the end goal? Why? Have we shared that with the community? Or are parents constantly surprised with, oh, now formatives don't count? Or, oh, now we're doing this. What's this plus minus that the board's been talking about? I feel like you guys have your plan, you know it, right? Is it a communication and implementation issue? Was it wise to not include those marks when we get to the part about selective schools wanting more information on transcripts? Was that the way, we can't change the past, but I just wonder if we're getting to a point where we need a pause, or would encourage you all to have a pause and reflect on some of this feedback that just frankly seems to be in our faces pretty often as board members.
I'll respond to just a couple of the things that you shared, Julie. We did, as a grading implementation committee, we talked about the formative piece throughout the course of the time that we met first semester, and we also talked to some kids about it. And quite honestly, it was something that we struggled through that conversation, and different members of the grading implementation committee felt differently about a potential shift in counting formatives for points. We had that discussion, and we had a productive, I'd call it a productive struggle in terms of our conversation, because there was not a unanimous, the committee at large did not feel like, absolutely, we need a change with some of the other changes for second semester. I'll also share, we talked to principal student advisory kids, and we talked mostly about retakes, but the conversation then went in the direction of talking about formatives for points as well. And kids were in different spots as well, and we didn't necessarily share detailed feedback from what the kids had shared, but our last meeting that we had one at South and then one over here at North Campus, and there were more than a few kids in the room that said, this is working for me. Were there some kids that said, yeah, count formatives for points? Absolutely. So they were kind of all over the board as well. And so we did have a chance to talk with kids, to talk with our implementation committee, and really had significant conversations about this point. So we're always reviewing things, right? We're always talking about where we're at right now, what's working, what's not working, and how might we make adjustments in the future. And we talk about that holistically and then with certain components as well. I'm not saying that we're going to be making an adjustment there. I'm just saying, like, our job and through the work of the grading implementation committee, one thing that we're going to do moving forward, this came up at our last meeting, is restart a communications committee so that we can make sure that we're sharing the why and making sure in one of your charts that's following in your packet, it does have a timeline. Make sure, these are on the website, but make sure that people know, here's the timeline, here's the things that we've done, here's where we're going in the next year, and then thinking about what those future communications are as well. So we realize that we have to coordinate our communication efforts as well.
I think, too, that's really been consistent the last 5 years. I can remember in March of 2020, the town hall forum and the communications we sent out at that time referenced the long-term desire to go A to F, and we always are trying to find the sweet spot of sharing information too early versus when people don't really care at that moment versus sharing them when we're there. And as we shared earlier this evening, we're not there with A to F yet. We have such a small fraction of teams that are transitioning to that. We know long term that we're moving to A to F. We know in education, this isn't an LT thing. We know in education, high schools nationally are going A to F. It's not a matter. I really firmly believe it's not a matter of if. It's a matter of when. And so we're going to continue to get feedback. We'll continue to update the website. Share information as much as we can to keep people in the loop. And obviously, we very much value teacher input and everything we do, whether it's committee work, going back 5 years on this from the research committee that did school visits, that was 60 people, 60 teachers, 70 teachers. At the same time, we also know with any implementation, we're going to have teachers that express concerns about that, and we also want to be responsive to them every step of the way as well. It'll be interesting over the next year or two to see the articles and research that come out of the pandemic, because we feel pretty confident that because we made some of these changes, we've positively impacted students where we're at, versus if we would not have made these changes 2 years ago or 3 years ago. But certainly all the concerns, going back the last couple of years, we always those are part of our conversations. Those are part of the discussions we're having with teacher teams. It's really the core of what happened from November to January was, okay, where are we at with the changes, in December of 2021? And what adjustments do we need to make? And then the key part there is, what adjustments do we need to make that don't take us off of our long-term philosophy? We want to stay true to that vision. And that's a hard thing to do, but it does require a lot of teeth gnashing and conversations and struggle and debate. That's not going to end. That's going to continue on. We know this is a long-term journey with where we're at with this.
Understand. I completely agree with that, Brian. However, the thing of it is that the vision, like we as a board, we'd like to believe that there's broad buy-in and that there's broad support, not even buy-in, but broad support and a broad acknowledgement that this is working. And that's the concern. So I appreciate the changes that were made. Retakes was the big thing that we heard out of first semester. There's too many retakes. So how do we know it's working? Do we have less retakes now right now? Are they even being tracked? I mean, because I'm still hearing of retakes where there's a morning retake and an afternoon retake after school, and they're packed. And that's the problem, right? The problem is that the kids are not doing the work along the way such that it's putting them into this spiral of retakes, which is causing all these other domino effect problems. And I want to feel confident that the changes have actually affected that positively. And I think if they have, we would hear very broad scale support, very broad scale buy-in that this is moving in the right direction. And I think as a board, what some of us are trying to say is we're still not there yet.
Yeah.
And so it's, April, how do we get to a point where we know if it has worked or further changes need to be made? 10%, I'm just completely throwing this out as a hypothetical. But if there was something instituted such as no harm homework for the students that did, need that opportunity because they didn't do homework through the whole semester, but they still need an opportunity to show mastery in the tests, great. For those students that need that motivation, that extra, I'm going to do this work because I know it's important, and I also know that it could shift me from a D+ to a 7 or C-, 10%. That would seem to be a powerful message to say, keep doing what you're doing, keep working hard. You're gonna get this. You're doing better. So I just think there's different ways that we can go about this, different approaches that still could accomplish the vision of making sure that the grade is not inflated with any, I don't know the word, I don't want to say fluff, but I think you know what
Behaviors.
I mean.
What's
and
that?
still demonstrates that the learning has taken place, that the mastery according to that grade has been done, but still helps kind of round out the edges of some of the other things that we're hearing.
Yeah, I think the retake is a big unknown. Where obviously that was, it was very clear by mid-October, halfway through the semester, that we had to do some of the retakes last semester. That is qualitative data that we're going to need to collect over the next 6 weeks. Certainly the first semester grades we collected, we will do the same thing with second semester grades, but to your point, getting some feedback on whether the adjustment in retakes had an impact this semester is important. We do still inherently believe in the value of retakes, and we want to continue to offer retakes as a school. And so we do believe that that's something that should be consistent across course teams. So it's not a matter of whether we want to reverse retakes and go back to either go back to several years ago where they just weren't allowed in schools, or even a few years ago where it was inconsistent. We inherently believe in the value of them, but we do need to constantly adjust our policies and give staff the tools where students aren't on the retake cycle that they were on in October. So we need to collect some data on that over the next few weeks.
And go ahead, Michael.
One of the things that I wanted to just get clarified on, would be I think last year there was going to be training done with teachers regarding how to give feedback on areas of opportunity after the exams, and is that component even incorporated into training now? I know we have this A through F teams going through that, but how to provide concrete feedback so that students really kind of understand where they need to be able to improve versus you're on your own and figure out working through homework that you may or may not have done to be able to do the retake, but some constructive feedback in that whole loop of training.
It's a great question. One of the things that we did this semester is we shifted the nature of our PLC reporting tool. And at the beginning of the semester, we asked our PLCs to tell us areas that they might need support in, and feedback was one of them. So we've provided a couple of presentations. Some PLCs attended together, and then some individuals attended together. And we had 2 workshops that were offered at each North and South campus during PLC time. So certainly this is good stuff. This is stuff that we need to think about expanding to others as well, but that was an area that teams identified the need to continue their learning process in, and then we responded by having a couple of presentations this semester, learning opportunities, workshops for teams and individuals to attend. So that's something that we're constantly looking at.
Right, because I'm just hopeful that that is going to be something that is par for the course for all teachers to be able to do, because I think that that's like one of the consistent standards that should be like as part of and rooted in place so that this whole thing or experiment works.
Super important feedback, super important concept to work with our teachers on and to continue to develop. So thank you.
One of, Dawn hit on this of the idea of the summatives, and I know, Scott, you had said that some of those schools were saying, I wish we had never gone to give those, the points towards that, but it's, and we'll make sure I'm reading this correctly, but 14% count 0 of the grade as those. Are those ones, who are they? And is it working to do that right now for them? I guess I'm curious, who's doing our plan? How we're doing it, and is it working at their schools?
I would have to look specifically I don't have that, I have the information by going back into the survey and parsing that out, so I can get that for you. No one has a plan that, we've all sort of built our models based on our experiences in our own schools. So, it's not like there's pick this model, pick that model, pick that model. There's bits and pieces of all of them, and a lot of that is, it's not formally negotiated, but it is a lot of back and forth discussion. Like, what do people believe? What are we able to effectively do? One of the things we did before we made any changes to grading practices is we had multiple years of formative assessment training on how to develop good, solid formative assessments. So we believed we were in a position where we had a solid background for our instructors as far as how formative assessments were put in place and how they are aligned to their summatives. We're finding that that leap isn't always there. And so one of the things we're looking at, and this is a little bit further along, one of the things we're looking at is having that curriculum review component to make sure that our assessments are aligned, that the activities and the experiences that our students are having in the classroom are leading to that outcome, that summative experience. Because again, we often would have, when there was a lot of inconsistency, some teachers like to spend more time on one area than another, or so there wasn't a consistent experience for kids. So we spent a lot of time on that formative to get things consistent. We feel we need that extra step now to make sure that that leap from formative to summative is there as well. And that's really next in our line of the curriculum review process.
Well, and part of that is I see the worry for me is that I don't think the kids are doing the formatives. I mean, I don't think, so I think if if they're sliding through the formatives and just taking that summative, or just doing the formatives to do the retakes. That's the worry I have about worrying too much about the formatives.
I think we probably, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because I've heard it from a few of you who've said that. I've kind of heard the opposite, in that I know a lot of students who are doing their formatives, and we're doing it before the retake policy. And I know some students, I mean, I live with one who's only taken one retake in 2 years. So I guess, so I just think it's really important that we're having this discussion. But I think we also have to understand sometimes it's easy to put a broad stroke on things and make it sound like it's happening everywhere. And then I think that's where we look to you guys to really tell us, you know, is what we're hearing sometimes just a perception, or is it a reality? So I know that that's part of it, and that's why I think it's going to be critical with what Jen finds out, and then in the audit, and then a reflection of where we were with how that retake policy changed this year. I think that'll tell us a lot. And I think that's all I want to do, is just put a little pause on that, those broad stroke things, those snippets that we hear in community, and also understand if that is truly, like I said, really happening to a large population or to a segmented population, and then what's the bird's eye view. And that's what, you know, we have to really rely on this team to provide back to us, is what is really happening at that bird's eye view. And I think the only other thing I would add to that too, sorry Allison, is just that I did do some digging around myself, and I wanted to know too, from your perspective, again, to Brian's point of it's not so much if as when. Is this something that is also being pushed at the state level? And is there going to be any, I didn't see that it doesn't seem that it's being mandated to us in some sense, but is there some push? I feel that I've seen this, it's been coming through Springfield for years. It looks like 10 years maybe or more that there's been talk about how this is going to change or revolutionize the way we're doing our grading practices. Is that some of that too, where there may take some of the choice to that, and not choice, but you know what I mean, the control out of that?
Yeah, I mean, to handicap what the state's going to do is always a challenge, and that is a challenge in Illinois. And a couple of the articles, the one about New England in particular, you saw states going in these directions. Illinois does not lead that way, and it leads 800 different districts to come up with 800 different systems, and it is maddening. I mean, I've often said, if you ever want to see a really amazing educational system, take a look at New Zealand. Not only are they consistent with grading, but all of their curriculum, all of their assessments, everything is there, and it's research-based, and it's focused, and it's phenomenal. We all make it up on our own in every district in the state of Illinois every year, and and so you have to do what we're doing, and talking to other schools, seeing what they've learned, learn from other people's mistakes, lead from things that we've found that have worked. You know, to some degree, there's a lot of experimentation in Illinois that you don't find anywhere else because you have that freedom. Stevenson High School is a national model because of that experimentation, and the gentleman who created that, who invented the professional learning community, started it at Stevenson High School. So there is that sort of model as well. But yeah, the state would love for us to all be consistent and have fewer districts, but they're not providing the guidance, and that's good, bad, I don't know, but it does certainly lead us to a whole lot of inconsistency among different districts.
I think ultimately, too, you end up with districts, like to Allison's point, not implementing a model, but picking and choosing certain components of it and not doing it with fidelity. That's really what you see.
So
the one thought I had, and Carrie, this goes along with what you were saying, is I just don't want to dismiss and think that we're generalizing when, you know, we saw the LTEA comments, the feedback, the surveys. A lot of teachers' voices with their feedbacks, and I don't want to keep dismissing this. I do want to understand what it is, what is actually happening, because I am hearing, I am hearing what I'm seeing on the LTEA feedback. That's what I'm hearing from a lot. And I do want to get to the bottom line of what is happening, because, that's what I'm seeing, that's what I'm hearing, and I'm not comfortable with what I'm hearing and seeing.
I think if the last part of this presentation talks about how we get teacher voice and the way we're supporting teachers. Since the beginning of this, we've had a really focused plan with committees and ways to get teacher input. So I think, and that has been in place for several years and is going to continue. So I think if we get to that last part that talks about the grading implementation team, that is our mechanism for getting teacher input. And every department is represented in that effort too. So I think the point is very clear, we value that as well. We value teacher input and voice in this as we have for the last several years, and we're going to continue to seek that out. I know I have regular conversations with Andrew, Jen does as well. It has been an important part of what we do and will continue to be.
Well, and it's such a significant change, and I think, certainly well-intended and well thought out and supported by research. And with any sort of change rolling out, I think hearing and keeping ears and eyes open along the way, as, again, you've demonstrated with the modifications with second semester, is super important. I'm trying personally to read up more on the theory to kind of come up to where I'll never be at your level of dedication to the topic, but even things when I read about formative work, I believe it's intended to, it's not graded because it's intended to let students practice without penalty or harm. Right. But I haven't gotten far enough into the books and the research to understand if they're not doing the homework, if they're not preparing for the formatives because they don't count, are we achieving that goal of allowing them to practice without harm? Or if, as you pointed out, Scott, if teachers aren't consistently phenomenal or comfortable giving feedback on that formative work. So, I think you can stay tied to the plan, but continue to be really curious and almost push for feedback and push for the negatives to say, okay, how can we learn from this? How can we make it better? Rather than, there's pressure to keep going, right? You only have 30 of the 250 sections in A to F. I'm sure you'll get there. But I think the process is so important, and teacher voice and communication. And let parents know, hey, we're going through a major change, and we heard a lot from you this year, but there is more changes coming. Is it helpful for parents to understand about, I forget the name again, these points and the what are they called? The side points, I call them.
The process marks?
Oh, yeah.
Process marks. You don't want to have a
We
year
call
of
them process
students.
marks, and someone calls them something else.
When that comes out, will all parents be surprised at what that is and what it means? Or could we be doing something, even if it's an archived timeline or document along the way, to point people to say, hey, we've had this out here for years. I'm just trying to give some ideas on what might help.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Continue with the mission, but make it a little smoother going forward.
That's good.
Well, and again, we've made a deliberate choice to slow down. Prior to pandemic, and everybody's going to say this now for the rest of our lives, right? But we were going to have process marks and the changes all 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And we were going to be moving in an A to F for everybody next year. That was the original goal. We've learned a lot along the way, even without the pandemic. And part of that is the curriculum has to be in the right place. And what we've learned is some of the teachers, in particular, some of those who've had the greatest criticism about this shift, their curriculum isn't in the place for it to work right. And we realize that now. We've learned that. So the presentations you saw in February were 2 teaching teams that made significant changes to their curriculum so that practice is embedded and so that it moves toward multiple measures of the outcomes in the course. That's not the case in some of our courses. We have some very traditional courses, and they're some of our loudest vocal opponents of what we're doing right now because we haven't made that shift in how the course is being taught. We've only looked at the grading. And we recognize that, and that's sort of our aha moment and where we're headed next. in particular. But that being said, we also don't want to go backwards with the 6 fixes. And by the 6 fixes, we're talking about counting zeros, not allowing retakes, those types of things, not counting group grades, because we want each grade to measure an individual student's learning, not the fact that you did all the work and we all got the credit, right? So these are all things that we're staying pretty true to, actually extremely true to, but with the wiggle rooms being some of these other areas where we can make some modifications to the qualifications for a retake, for example. So again, we're trying to, the goal, my goal is that we never talk about grading, we talk about the curriculum and how we made those changes, because the grade should just be a measure of what students have learned. That's what it is. But if we haven't made those changes to the curriculum, we're seeing that as our pain point right now. So in that sense, the question was asked, what are the pain points for adding points to formatives? That's not where my mind is. My mind is, how do we change the course in such a way so that it isn't about points for formatives. It's about, what do I need to do to demonstrate to you that I know what's going on in this class? And there's different ways to do that. That's a big change. That's a shift, right? And so that's really where we're trying to focus the next few years, honestly. You talked about what's our goal. Our original goal was a little faster to a whole 8F concept. We need to review all of our curriculum. We need to go 9, 10, 11, 12. I would say the earliest we're anywhere near 250 teams at 8F is 4 years from now, because we need to bring people on. We need to bring some of the process to upgrade and update our curriculum so that we are focusing on the essentials of that curriculum, that we're not just including a lot of stuff because we've always included a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And those are long conversations, those are difficult conversations, but when you look at the schools that have gone more into that standards-based or standards referenced or whatever term you want to call it, they've done that work. And that's what the teams that we have who are 8F are doing. They're doing that work. And that's really where you see the grading system making the most sense.
And just real quick on A to F, if it's going to be 4 years from now, I'm thinking about transition, and there's already pilot programs, and I personally have 2 students in a pilot, so their experience is different, right, and not consistent, as you've self-admitted. Do most schools, when they go to A through F, do it all at once? Never. It's a stair-stepped, and kids are...
Stevenson, it took them 10 years.
Okay.
And honestly, before we were at A to F, we had multiple teaching teams doing A to F style grading. Okay. They were counting, they were doing a 4-point scale, for example, at 100, 75, 50, 25. So the kid's grade would be 75, and they'd say you have a B, and the parents were absolutely confused. Sure. Right? We had all of that happening 6 years ago. And most of those teams are now in that A to F realm, and they have fine-tuned, and we've given them the right tools to demonstrate the grade that is a measure of what the students have learned. So we've had teams that have been on this for quite a while, and we've had teams that have been doing this using points even in the 1960s, 1970s, where you had sort of a contracted grade, or you had some of those where here are the outcomes of the course, as long as you meet the outcomes, you get the grade. Those are things that have they're not brand new to education. But what you're seeing is a much more coordinated effort, and that's really kind of where we knew we had these really disparate courses, and we had to have something common so that it wasn't this course and that course and that course are all totally different, but trying to do the same basic things. So in any case, so much of what we've done is organic and has come out of teacher experimentation, and then looking at the research and how can we make it much more consistent and understandable. And again, so we're still working with a lot of those things too. What you're seeing, though, is more and more of a push nationwide to do something like this, and for, as you see here, and again, I don't have to read slides to you, but what colleges are starting to look at as far as how do they interpret a transcript, what our associate schools are doing, and you'll notice they're all over the board. So, really, we're in a big transition mode in education right now, and that's really what we're trying to navigate more than anything.
I think I would love to hear a little more of that. Can you go into that second part of
Sure,
your
yeah.
presentation there, Scott?
So I can wake up my computer here. So I did ask, I meet monthly with their curriculum directors at our associate schools, just sort of a thumbnail sketch, what is grading like? And you'll notice that it kind of fits what we've heard from other high schools as well. We have, in District 101, K-5 is standards-based, 6 through 8. They award grades with allowances for retakes using formatives worth 20% and summatives worth 80%. They give traditional grades. District 102 uses proficiency scales of 1 to 4. No grades are given, only summatives count. This is our largest sender school, nearly 400 students, and that's what they're bringing. So we've also heard a little bit, and this is in your forums with the students, depending on where students have come from, is also how they're perceiving the grading system here at LT. In District 105, formatives are weighted less than summatives, but they don't have hard percentages. Summatives are the primary, and they do use grades. And then Districts 106 and 107 it sort of depends on the team. Their grades are based on an accumulation of points. Tests and projects are worth more. Everything counts. District 107 said the same thing, but they're also taking off for late work, allowing extra credit, doing a lot of the traditional grade-based things. And they would say even their teams aren't necessarily as consistent as perhaps some of the others. So we have students walking in the door here with every experience, right? And this doesn't even include, we have students who come from as many as 20 different schools, right? So this doesn't even include our parochial schools, some of our private schools, and kids who transfer. Some kids are transferring from places that are fully standards-based and whatnot. So again, the kids are coming in with many different expectations of grades and grading. One of the things that in our explanation to them, to our associate schools of what we've been doing, we've been trying to get the 8th grade teachers to get out of the habit of saying, well, I am assigning homework because it counts in high school, right? Or we're going to take points off because they take points off in high school. Well, we're not anymore. And so that sort of has shifted some of their thinking a little bit as well. But that was probably the biggest threat or explanation for why grades were happening sometimes in 8th grade was because, well, high school's not changing, we're going to follow what they do. Well, we made some changes, and so we're starting to see changes both front and back, so sort of a symbiotic movement in some areas. All right, that's number one. The second question is, how do colleges view changes to grading practices? I did provide 3 articles, and really one of them is a summary. I'm very interested in the whenever NACAC decides to come out with what they've found from the pandemic, because everything you see here, keep in mind, they hadn't jettisoned SAT scores or ACT scores like almost every college did through the pandemic. They didn't change the way that they're looking at AP scores to some degree because of the way AP scores were scored. So this is kind of as the world was when we started to make our major changes. But even so, colleges are still looking at grades. And I think no matter what you ask anyone, they're going to tell you that a grade is a measure of learning. It's a measure of what a student has learned. And in a couple of the articles later, they've talked about that too. They're worried about grade inflation because so many things are piled into a grade. They want to know what really that grade is all about. They certainly believe that the grades in all high school courses are considered important. The college prep courses, that's not what we consider college prep. That would be advanced courses. So AP, honors, sometimes accelerated. Colleges don't understand our accelerated level. They usually don't see it as equivalent to honors or AP. so that we try through our school profile to demonstrate that it is more of a challenge, but it's really up to that school to decide. And what many of the schools do anyway is they strip all weights and all levels off of all grades, and they just look at the list to see which grades are college prep, and they give their own weighting based on those. And sometimes it depends on the actual major. You'll notice even in 2018, which is where the data for this came from, only half of colleges gave ACT and SAT considerable weight. So they were already kind of moving off from that as a huge indication. As far as selective colleges, the selective colleges were much more emphasis placed on grades in those college prep courses and the strength of the curriculum. So what that usually means is not every high school offers the same things. So we offer, 29 or something AP classes. Some schools offer 12. Did you take them? That's what they want to know. Did you take what was the advanced options at your school or not? Then not suggesting that you take 29 or however many here at LT, but is it in your profile if you're looking for a selective school? They also rate more highly the essay, the writing sample, the counselor and teacher recommendations, extracurricular activities, and work, because they know that all the grades are going to be good. They know that when a kid is going to a highly selective school, they're trying to make a fine line gradation of a whole lot of good grades to the kid, the target that they're looking for. So they look at all of these other ancillary things. For first generation admittance, these are kids for whom they're the first in their families to ever go to college. 31% of the schools rated first generation status as at least moderately important in first time freshman admissions decisions. That means that a third of the colleges were looking at that as an indicator. That was something they wanted. They wanted to find those kids and give them that opportunity. About a quarter of the colleges considered high school attended race, ethnicity, and state or county of residence as either moderately or considerably
Scott,
important.
do you want to advance the slide?
Oh, sorry. Thanks. I told you, I can't see it. So about a quarter of the colleges consider that high school attended, and it's not so much, sometimes, like when you look at CPS, they have a number of magnet schools that are really well known. So when you're looking at Walter Payton Prep, that's something that a school will look for, that a student went there and did well, or that they went there, did well, and were Latinx, first generation. So some schools really, they do consider that as something that they're looking for. So in previous years, that wasn't really done, and it wasn't certainly reported. But it is something that is more and more, it's also more and more a part of college ratings. So the U.S. News and World Report, they look at that as an indicator, and that often does drive admissions decisions. It helps colleges to make some changes in that sense. So I found the NACAC study to be really important. When we decided to eliminate class rank, we looked very heavily at this NACAC study because it was happening more and more that schools were not using rank, and not only was it not hurting kids, it was actually helping kids in the middle and not hurting the kids at the top. Those were our two considerations for that, because if you were here at LT and you were ranked 412th, you're in the top half of your class, but 412 is not like a set the world on fire rank. But if you're at a school of 200 kids, 400 doesn't exist, right? So these are things that we felt with the rank, it was let's have the colleges look at these more specific metrics. That's also led to what the two other articles talked about, which is how they evaluate proficiency-based high school transcripts, or how they're looking at transcripts really in general. The one with the New England states is this one. And that holistic review allows admissions professionals to carefully consider each applicant in his or her individualized learning environment. They had mentioned that they get applications from all over the world, and IB, and even being the person who looks at transcripts coming from our students who transfer in here for difficult cases. That's how I learned about New Zealand. I'm like, this is so fascinating. You learn just how different systems are, and how some are on a 7-point scale, or some are on no grades whatsoever, and it's all handwritten. It's pretty interesting. So you have to have a system for that. Proficiency-based transcripts and school profiles should explain what learning standards mean within the context of the particular high school. So this gets into what we were talking about before. And in our school profile, we talk about a little bit about our grades and our grading practices and what's in the grade. I've seen some other examples that go into a whole lot more detail, and that's always a point of decision-making, because as much as they want to say that they spend a whole lot of time on a holistic review, it's still a pretty fast review. I mean, if you went to college night, I hope that some of those admissions directors remember the names and faces of some of our kids, but man, did they see a lot of kids in a course of 2 hours, and that's just LT, right? So there is a way, we have to balance what our grades are showing, and also provide that extra information. And lastly, the inclusion of habits of work and cross-curricular knowledge.
Real quick question.
I'm
Yep.
so sorry. You finish. I just wanted to come back to the school.
No, go ahead.
If you get a chance. Because also, for better or worse, I live this every day.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think all the pain points that you're talking about, I would say, have been validated in my own conversation with my colleagues. Just, such a wide range of grading systems, and it's not so much even that they strip away any different grading skills, but often they have their own algorithm altogether, and your stuff gets plugged in, but what have you. But what I have heard is that those school profiles can be very, very helpful, and I know you shared it in a slide a few months ago, but I would personally love to see how it gets explained, what that balance
Sure.
is for that. But I also think it's important to put a point, and you have it here, but just to make the point that it's really selective, very selective, and private schools that are even have the capacity for a holistic review.
Correct.
Large state schools, Big Ten schools, I mean, it's just like a churn. It just comes through, you get plugged in, and that's where we go back to an A through F and how that can impact a student, but that school profile can help with that. So, I mean, I'm glad to have this conversation, because that whole package is really important. So if there's a chance that we could see that, have an opportunity to ask questions, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think, like anything, prior to the shift of the profile, the way it's been probably the last 6 years, we just basically had a transcript that printed all the grades, and then had dozens of lines of sort of corollary. In the year 1999, this happened, and case in point, when we went to Infinite Campus, we didn't set up our grading system to have pluses and minuses, because we didn't have a consistent plus minus. So we had some teachers where an 89.5 was a round up and an 89.5 was a B. We didn't have that consistency, so we took pluses and minuses off for 2 years. We put them back on because of concerns that were raised by community members and by just in general, and teachers are saying they wanted them. But then we had to determine what a plus and a minus was for that grading system to work. But then we've never had our grades impact the GPA with pluses and minuses. We've always had whole grades for our GPA. So again, those are all the kinds of things that I've been here long enough to know all that, and someone looking at one of our kids and their transcripts has no clue with that, and they're just looking at it and going, right? And that is a challenge. And I think we should definitely, Leanne really helped us modernize our profile, but like you said, they change all the time, and with a lot of changes of grading practices everywhere, we should probably definitely look at that again and see how we can improve that and provide as much information as possible. I've seen some, though, that are 4 pages long explaining the grading system, and that's probably more than we want. But again, it's all, having links to it, those are all, it all depends on the, like you said, the school. That being said, those, in both research articles, they said that it wouldn't, going in that direction wouldn't disadvantage a student in the evaluation process, again, as long as it's explained. And I think what both articles talked about was, we don't want grade inflation for a whole lot of things like extra credit and behaviors. We want the grade to be a measure of learning, and if you have these behaviors, that would be even better, because then we would know, that gets into what I think we're talking about with our portrait of a graduate. Those are the soft skills. Those are what kind of a person are you? What kind of a team player are you? All those kinds of things. Those pieces, colleges want to know that too, because again, they want to make sure that your investment, which is no small amount, is a good one, and that the students stay. And the 5- and 6-year graduation rate of 4-year institutions will curl your hair once you start looking at that. It's not high. Kids drop out, change their mind, do other things. And again, if an admissions officer had in their mind, they want everyone to stay the whole time. But it doesn't happen that way. So how do you hit? How do you miss? And those are some challenges too. So, I think the second article, Getting a Fair Shot, gets at very similar things. And that, they also basically said the worst thing we can do is admit students when they don't have the skills to be successful. So that kind of gets at this slide. We suspect grades are inflated and standardized tests are biased. I think most of us would be interested in knowing that you've removed the variables that inflate grades, thus recognize the importance of providing accurate grades that reflect both academic achievement and behavior. Work ethic, attendance, perseverance reported separately becomes a critical responsibility of secondary school educators. Again, with the process marks and some of the things we're headed towards, I believe we are moving toward that so that our grades are not based on non-academic factors, right? But in any case, I think you can find a lot about what colleges think. And one of the things I would encourage all of you, if you have a specific question about a specific college, let me know, let any of us know. We'll call and find out. As I surveyed the CADCA group, I did sort of a quick second survey. I said, do any of you know of schools that take into account pluses and minuses? And one person said Michigan. So I called Michigan admissions office today and got for whatever reason, maybe because the kids are all done applying, actually got the head of admissions answer. And I said, what do you guys do? He goes, no, we take off all pluses and minuses. We rack everything with a 4-point scale, so all Bs are 4s, all As are 5s, doesn't matter if they're pluses or minuses, and then we look to see at your strength of schedule. So did you take advanced courses? So we have a 6-point scale for honors, a 5-point scale for Excel, and a 4-point scale for prep. Colleges strip all that stuff away, right? And so, again, but that might not be the case somewhere else. I mean, when we eliminated rank, there was a college, Swarthmore, who wanted a rank. We found many, many more that didn't care or didn't want it, or they said we would use it if it were presented, and if it's not, we won't. So again, we can do that homework. We want to do that homework because we want to make sure we want all of our kids to get into the college that they want to get into and succeed at that college and graduate and matriculate. Who doesn't want that? So any changes we're making, we're going to figure out what we need to do to make sure we're being truthful and honest, because that's our goal. I mean, we want them to succeed. We want them to go to that college they've always dreamed of and get into it and finish, right?
Scott, just a couple hopefully quick ones. I saw in the memo, but not in the slides, about plus minus. You just started to talk about it a little more, bit more. I think just intuitively, I continue to struggle with how less information aids in decision making when all these schools said, 75% grades are important. The more we can tell them about grades, which to me is whether the kid had a B plus or a B minus, and mostly A's if they're applying to a selective school. I think that's two totally different candidates, and I really struggle to. And I'd love to, maybe I should call Michigan and understand why they just dropped them right off the bat. But so I saw in your memo, though, that you'd continue to try to research that, and I know many of us had questions on that last time. The school profile, I'm not terribly familiar with it, but the more I read in these articles, it sounded really important. So including, I know you had one of the quotes on there, and you had the second half of the quote on the previous page, but there was a big caveat of they're not disadvantaged, but,
Right.
but they also caution that the lack of information or transparency in transcripts or school profiles can present a hurdle in an admission officer's attempt to accurately assess a student's achievements. Again, back to my kind of intuitive, if there's more information available to, and you made the point earlier in your discussion, they're going through a lot of students and trying to distinguish who's going to be a better fit. I'd be interested in that school profile and to understand how transparent we are being. And I guess even current state on the A through F, and I've mentioned I've got a couple kids in one of the pilots, and so their grades don't have a plus or minus. Is that explained on the transcript or in a school profile when that kid goes to apply, or if it's, perhaps it's an outlier and they had X grade plus, and then this looks like the lowest in the pilot class? Is that explained on the transcript, that this is a pilot and they couldn't have had a minus or a plus? Or is that not part of any of the
We
communication?
can certainly look to put it in. In talking with Leanne Musser in the College Career Center and talking with other schools and in talking to, granted, it's a limited number of admissions officers that I've talked to, but highly selective in University of Chicago, University of Illinois, and DePaul, it's not even so much that it's information they're looking for, it's not even discussed. So in looking to try and see what do you think about pluses and minuses, people don't even talk about it, which that's unique. I mean, that's it's not like, oh yeah, we don't care about, it's that, well, we don't take it into account.
Okay.
Part of it, and this is the challenge with, if the underlying theme of the Getting a Fair Shot was they don't really trust high school grades, right? It was they're inflated, there's all sorts of stuff in there that shouldn't be in there, so whatever you call it, we don't care, just tell us how you arrived at your grade. So there's a certain degree of mistrust, and that plus minus, I get the sense is that that's sort of a thing that we do as high school educators, that the colleges want to know more, did you attain it or not? Or did you make the grade or not? Now, that being said, my son's at a college that gives you a plus and a minus with a percentage on it, right? Some do, some don't. Some do that only at the graduate level. So, but then I also got a degree that had no grades. So, I mean, there's a little bit of everything out there. It's how do you explain it and how do you do that? So our profile is on the website. It's a part in our college area. It's something I share with the board every year. And again, a lot of times the stuff that we share isn't necessarily in the context, perhaps, of where you might be ready to see it. But it was shared already this year in the fall.
I'll share that link with the board tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yep. I think it was October.
But again, we may want to upgrade some of that and include more information on that too. I mean, that's, again, we always want to make sure that through the pandemic, we had a hard time with that because we didn't have test scores. They like to see sort of a score bands of test scores. So those are some things that we had to say this is the previous years or whatever, and that's true of every school. So again, there's a lot of those pieces there too.
And thanks again for the articles. It was helpful to, again, as I'm trying
Sure.
to up my education. I did click through to some of the sources like Great Schools Partnership and found a 24-page guide on many topics. I found it interesting that they talked about the distinguishment between grades and reporting. And again, my big beef is with the transcript and giving decision makers who are so busy less information. And there was an example of a New York high school that's on a 1 to 4 scale that then applies for the transcript purposes. They grade 1 through 4. To me, that sounds like our A through F, but then on the transcript, there's more delineation so that you can better distinguish performance. And again, maybe things to continue to explore, and I'd be interested to.
And we made that very conscious decision to use grades, to go A to F. Some schools have gone 1 to 4. It is that translation to a grade that we felt not only did our community want, but also colleges find it helpful. And the one article in here also said, do whatever you want, just translate it to a grade.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And again, that's, that was something that we all sort of resonated with us as well.
I just have one question about the curriculum review that you mentioned earlier. And you mentioned it in the note kind of teeing up the deck, that you're going to start this next year. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that kind of gets into the last section, if you don't,
Oh,
you want me
I'm
to do
sorry.
that, or?
Yeah, sorry.
So how are we involving and supporting teachers with the implementation of grading practices? So one of the things that we've been talking about all along, and again, the print is really tiny, but if you go on our grading website, this has been on there for months. Actually, it's been on there for years. We just keep updating little pieces of it. The timeline is, it also lays out there that we're looking to go in that direction. So the one, I don't know if this is any better on the screen, but one of the things we had hoped to do for next year was that process marks piece. I don't think we're there yet either. I mean, again, as we talk about what things we want to change and what are our certain pain points, when we put together the 21-22 plan, which is what you see here, we sort of laid out there that 22-23 where we're headed next. And in just looking at sort of where we're headed next, continuing to refine practices across all teaching teams with a goal to become more consistent by department and division, rolling out process marks, which again, the process marks gives you that descriptor of the non-academic the behaviors. So it's the things that sort of, the soft skills, if you will. Work toward emphasizing outcomes in curriculum maps that could lead to additional 8F course teams. And that's where you get into where it says here, conduct a curriculum review to ensure greater fidelity from year to year in a sequence, horizontal articulation, and among all levels of a course, which would be vertical articulation, and then adding in those career pathways. So essentially what a curriculum review is and what we're looking to do with that, and we'll be talking with our chairs about it, really it's going to be the bulk of what we do right at the end of the school year after this, like sort of June sort of thing. But Katie and I have been trying to fine tune it because we don't want to put something out there that's sort of half-baked. Any curriculum review, though, what you're going to do is you're going to be taking a look at what are the outcomes of a course and how is everything in the course aligned. So are the assessments aligned? Are the curriculum materials aligned? And a lot of things we do sort of here at the board level, I bring you those in pieces, sort of piecemeal. But when we went to the curriculum map, we made a conscious decision to write down everything we're currently doing. What we need to do in this curriculum review is where do we want to go, and how do we make sure that we're not reteaching and reteaching and reteaching, or where are the gaps? So there's a gap analysis component. Are things aligned to standards, and how are we measuring that? I can't explain it to you in 30 seconds, and that would require, and I fully expect to have another one of these meetings where we talk about all the details, but it also includes an equity review. We want to make sure that all of that is included. We also need to make sure we're hitting all of the state mandated curriculum, and every year, and you saw with our last press issue, we get more and more state mandated curriculum. Where is it? How are we measuring it? How are we tracking it? So we're starting with freshman year. We're looking to go freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And through that curriculum review, again, at the fastest, we would be able to make changes year over year. But I think for some of our courses, we'll have to really look too, do we still need them? We have, for example, a very popular course is keyboarding. Does that really make a whole lot of sense, or should it be more computer applications, and do we merge the two, right? So we want to look at a lot of those things, and then we also want to look at sequencing. So curriculum review is a whole lot more than grading, but when you look at that curriculum review, your outcomes should be really clear, and those are the things that you're measuring, and those are the things that your grade is based on. So, did we get the cart before the horse with grading? We thought with the background we'd done with formative assessment and aligning to summative assessments that work was very close, and we learned that we're probably not as close as we want to be yet. And I think some of our teams are going to need a little more time even to consider that we haven't made shifts to the Common Core standards for mathematical practices, for example, or how do we best bring in the next generation science standards, and are we doing that with fidelity? Are we having a lot of great activities, but it's not really getting to the outcomes that we want? So again, we've been, I'd say probably the biggest shift, and this is part of the reason why I think we're getting some pushback too, is we are laying on more of a structure to the curriculum, where in the past it was very much up to teaching teams. That being said, there's a lot of room for those teams to make the decisions, because they're the ones who need to make those decisions. We're just going to provide the template and the time and the process to go through. But that is where teachers absolutely are a part of everything. The other piece, and Jen Terrell mentioned it earlier, is that grading implementation team. This has been a team that's been around since 2016. It involves a member from every division and a number of administrators, and we have put together through that team, we've sort of been the sounding board for change. So the recommendations that were made for second semester came right through that particular group. And then at one point, prior to the pandemic, there were 4 subcommittees that reported to the implementation team, and members of the implementation team were on at least one of these others, and that was an Infinite Campus and Report Card Committee. We wanted to make sure that our report card was reflective and had all the details like you saw that the colleges are looking for. A communication committee that explained what we're doing, how we're doing it. That's the one that Jen mentioned we've resurrected and want to get more information out about. A staff development and training committee. Again, that's always sort of been embedded in our professional learning, but we knew that we needed to really focus particularly on grading staff development. That's not going away, and if anything, with the things that we're trying to do early on in the fall and some changes we'd like to make to our PLCs next year, and then you put in the curriculum review process, there's a lot of opportunity to do the things, especially like what you mentioned, Michael, how to give effective feedback and those types of things. That we want to make sure. We also want to make sure we're deliberate in that professional learning, so that it's not invitational, that there are certain things that people need to do, that there are sessions that they need to be involved in. Because we have some people who've done every bit of professional learning, and we have some who've done the bare minimum, and that just sort of widens a gap of knowledge, right? And lastly, we had a process mark and rubric development committee, and they were working on the things we've talked about a bunch of times tonight. All of these, I think, need to return, and I think it's a matter, again, of getting those teachers involved who have found some success in these areas, and getting teachers involved who have some serious questions. The current implementation team is not Kool-Aid drinking graders. We've got some real, some people asking some really tough questions and want some really tough answers. And more than anything, though, we want to make sure that we're moving forward, and that we want to move forward with getting the input from folks. Certainly the comments that were in the Faculty Association minutes, they had not come through this team, so I was really disappointed to see that that's how that was being portrayed, because we could have addressed all of that in our implementation team. So again, I want to make sure that we're playing fair too. I mean, I think that's something we have to talk about as well. I mean, I get it. There are always people who don't want to change, but there are people who've really busted their humps to get this to work, and they're really frustrated. And I don't know if you knew or not, but one of the teams that presented was chastised by their peers for being on board, and that's wrong. That's wrong. So I want to make sure that we're opening lines of communication and that we're being professional. And I think that's more than anything what I want to see. But I think that team is the right vehicle for having the conversation and for making change. We've given that team a lot of autonomy to come up with things. I sit on that team. Things have come through to this group, to our central leadership team, to division chairs, to and to the faculty. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to make that functional. The challenge has been, people really wanted to be on the team because they wanted to get their opinion out, and we have to meet a lot. This is not a quick fix kind of thing, so meeting every 2 weeks, we've had a few people kind of fall off. So, again, we're going to have to make sure we've got that commitment as well. So, and maybe we need to look at a different time or a different format, all things we want to take a look at. So I just want to make sure that you all know that we are not sort of sitting up here with, we've got the solution and just get on board. We are open to your questions and concerns. We're open to a lot of things, but I want to draw your attention to the very last page. This is what we will not waver on. That we want that our grading system is consistent throughout the school, equitable and fair to all students, and reflective of student performance. That's a vision. That is a big goal, right? Our purpose is that we have accurate, easy to understand, and descriptive of a student's level of academic performance as a purpose of grading. That it is bias resistant, that reflects the attainment of content knowledge and not evidence that is influenced by teacher implicit bias. And that it's motivational, that our grades do support a growth mindset, that there's opportunities for redemption so that kids aren't stuck. It's transparent so students know where they stand and how they can affect change, and that there is an opportunity for change. And the retake's a really important part of that. Our philosophy of grading does not believe in the one and done approach to assessment. Our philosophy does not believe that you have one shot at showing something, right? And lastly, connect the meaning of practice to the rewards of learning. And to some degree it's an intrinsic motivation. It's why you do the formative work, because you're going to have the opportunity to demonstrate that later. It's sort of do you put the time in practice and have the opportunity to demonstrate that at the game, so to speak. So really, the more I'm open to anything as long as these things stay at the forefront.
I think to Scott's earlier point, in addition to the teacher voice piece, we're always interested in the teacher support and finding time for professional development. We're having some conversations, not substantive conversations around next year's calendar in terms of days, but we are trying to find additional time for teacher support to work on grading practices. And so that's something that we anticipate coming back to the board in May with a potential change to calendar for next year. Again, not days or weeks or anything like that, but just trying to find some additional teacher PD time for, honestly, the primary purpose of grading practices.
And just on that point, Brian, I'm thrilled to hear that, because we know professional development and any change initiative that's going to take place is going to be much more successful if the professional development is stacked ideally before or along the way with the change. But so I don't know what that means, but I'm just speaking as one of 7 board members. I'd be very in favor of supporting whatever needs to happen to make sure that our teachers have that professional time, that it's dedicated, that it's time that they can all attend versus, trying to figure it out when they can make it to some of the other stuff I think you guys do is great, because you give lots of opportunities for people to join in, but I'm very supportive of the dedicated time as well.
So 2 quick things. One, I thought for the curriculum maps that over the past 2 years that all the classes and teachers were doing, that was in and of itself was like a curriculum review.
It was. The thing is, we haven't then taken those maps and compared Algebra 1 Prep to Algebra 1 Excel, perhaps, or Algebra 1 to Geometry to look for gaps. And in some cases, people put things on maps and never looked at the map again. So they've already become not a reflection of what's actually happening in the class. So we need to make sure that those are living documents and that they're updated and they're functional. And that's, again, a thing that our curriculum coordinators were working on this year. And it's something that as we go through this process, a very deliberate process that also includes that review of the maps. So the maps will change somewhat. They will I believe they will get closer and closer to what's really going on in the course. One of the things that you did not see in those maps is anything with summative assessments, which is what we're counting. So that's a problem, right? So we don't have much about the summatives in the maps. And then we also had only the formatives that were common. Well, now that we're much more common, those haven't been updated to reflect the common formatives. So we had some maps where there are no common formative assessments, and when you go on the map, it looks like there is nothing consistent in a course. That's sitting there right now in maps that exist. So it was a starting point. We knew it was a starting point, and we made a very deliberate decision to have people describe where their courses are now. Some schools do it where they say where you want the courses to be and then never get there. And so we wanted to start where we were now, and now we can make that move forward. So this is a multi-year process, and there's no way we can do every single course every year either. So we're going to have to pick and choose, with the 250-some course teams. A lot of those are single, right? You kind of saw in the example of the A to F teams, Hartley and music, those are all of our choir classes. That's 2 teachers, that's all of their classes. Some of them are really small, right? So that's a little bit different, and we have a lot of those teachers who teach 5 different preparations every day. They're not going to review all of their courses, right? So we're going to have to set that up too. Any curriculum review cycle never ends. It is an ongoing cycle. We're going to be focusing really on those core academic areas. But what you'll find is a lot of times teachers will say, I know I'm not in that core academic area, but we want to make sure, that's where the career pathways come in. We want to see a pathway for our autos program, all of the auto courses and how they align. And we want to align the assessments. And so there's a lot of room for doing the big picture work that we haven't done at this point, right?
And then just last, with the grading practices timeline, then will that be updated to reflect like now maybe 3 to 4 years out? Because you're not going to have all teams completed until about 3 or 4.
Right. I mean, I think as we look at that sort of timeline, that's a good question. I think we need to have our implementation team to take a look at, our chairs, really to sort of see where do we realistically think we're headed, right? Timelines are easy when you look back.
Right.
But
we'll have to update that.
But yeah, we can definitely do that.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I just would add that because this was such a meaty, long presentation, I appreciate all the information that you provided, Scott, but probably if we had a few more checkpoints along the way, smaller little bits of information, maybe we won't need to go through the same kind of long process. We could be, starting this conversation. I know this is all fairly new to everybody, this is kind of a new process, new board, but working through all those and providing some opportunities along the way, maybe we can stitch in just some updates as things are evolving and as you guys are reviewing and going through all of the audits and talking with the teachers and bringing back those committees, which sound pretty important, really amazing too. I think that would be great.
I just have one additional question on the curriculum review. So as you describe it, and if I heard you say, and I think that the mapping work that was done predates us, so I think that happened before this board convened this past May, so my knowledge of it is limited. But I heard you say that the mapping process was an exercise of everyone writing down what they're doing in the course. So right now, are our educational outcomes of each course based on what we're doing in those courses and based on what was written down?
They are, we believe, but again, the chairs haven't gone through, and we haven't done an audit of those. They were done, but they weren't, again, pandemic happened, and we got to the point where we had something for the first time. We'd never had maps that we were sharing with kids or parents. And I made the decision of put them out there because teachers, parents and kids need to know what's in this course if they're never going to step foot in the building. So they weren't, again, best laid plans. that's what they are, and we know they can be better, and they're good. They are a good starting point, but we also know that they're not what they could be or even should be. So that's where they are.
Okay, and then this, so then in this process, the curriculum review process that you're embarking upon and describing, that is when we will actually align more deliberately, or I'm not using the right words, but to the Common Core standards, to the next science standards, generation standards. Right now, I'm sure we're hitting some of them, but we're not, that will be the process that will actually line those up and make
Right.
sure that our outcomes and our courses are aligned with those standards and those.
Correct. We're using our U.S. history as our pilot model, for lack of a better term. That's the summer workshop, because they have new standards. So we're gonna take the process that we've developed and have them go through it. Katie Smith and I have been creating that model based on that U.S. history, as knowing that that's where we want to go with it. So again, we get through testing this week, we can finalize some of those pieces, and then get that together. So again, it'll be another lengthy presentation to you all, but because it's very complicated stuff. But definitely want to make sure you're aware of it as well, and knowing full well that nothing is ever. We're constantly renewing and changing and updating and starting an initiative 4 years ago that we're now going to refine now. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. We never do everything once.
But yeah, you can't with 250 courses. That's
No.
hard to do. This type of curriculum review, is it a new, is this a new version? Is this a new approach?
This is my 15th year as a director of curriculum. We've never done one. And my predecessor didn't do one, nor did the previous predecessor. The only thing that's happened in the last 30 years curriculum review-wise is we had MAPS in the early 2000s.
Okay.
So this is long overdue.
Yeah, and our curriculum reviews at the high school level, often a 5-year curriculum review as they are in other places?
They are all over the place. It really depends on the scope and sequence of your school, how large your school is, the capacity of your chairs. We happen to have full release chairs, so I believe we have pretty high capacity, although we have chairs who have over 60 teachers, so this is not a quick and dirty change, or process. So I would say, again, like I said, for our core courses, graduation requirement sort of things, I'm looking at a 4-year process. For our electives and other things, that's going to be a sort of concomitant pathway along with the career pathways, because again, we have a number of cool courses, but if they don't really connect with something, we need to, should we spend our effort and energy increasing the enrollments in something else? There are tough conversations that come along with the curriculum review, but we haven't done it. And so we just keep adding and adding and adding, and then having conversations with the board about, well, we've got a few, we can run it with 18, that kind of thing. How do we sort of really make sure we get a very robust curriculum?
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everyone, Jen, for the presentation tonight. Moving on, I think, Brian Stachek, if you're still with us tonight,
I'm here.
I think it's your turn to talk about the fiscal year 23 capital outlay requests, the grant-funded and district furniture requests, please.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone, again. So what you have before you tonight, typically what we do is we bring forth capital outlay requests 2 times to the board. The first one is usually in April, and what we do with this is we put any requests that are they're able to be funded with grants, we put those through and have the board approve those so that we can start submitting the grant information for next year. And then also we put together the furniture requests and bring those to the board as well, so that we can get those ordered and make sure that we have, enough time to get those items here and delivered to the district. I don't know what that's going to look like this year with supply chain issues and that sort of thing, but we're going to obviously, move forward with what we normally do. And let me back up and just so you're aware, the list that you have, the spreadsheet that you have, is generated really from administration, from division chairs, from supervisors, with the input of staff members as well. So it's a collaborative effort to get all of this information together, and so that's where this is generated from. And so, as I said, what you have before you tonight is those initial requests. We also have plenty more requests that we will administratively look through and bring those back in May. So that will be essentially requests for, maybe building modifications, for additional equipment for the classrooms, educational equipment, those types of things. And so we'll be bringing those back in May. And then again, this is all to be included in the FY23 budget. So none of it's set for right now in this year's budget. It would all be for essentially after July 1st of 2022. So that being said, really what you have in this particular spreadsheet that I have for you that begins on page 136, on lines 2 through 6, you have what we believe to be the grant allocated items that can be purchased with grant dollars, and Scott Eggerding and I go through these and make sure that they fit the grants themselves. And again, lines 2 through 6, about $56,000 estimated of capital equipment that can be purchased through the grants. And then the second section are lines 9 through 29, which are items that, as I mentioned before, are those furniture items. Some of those items are new, some of them are replacement, but you have them all there in the justification for all of those there as well. About $147,000 worth of furniture for the district for this coming year. That's quite a bit higher than what we've seen in past years, but we are also repurposing some areas, trying to make some better use of some spaces in the libraries, that type of thing. So that is why you're seeing a little bit more in terms of some of those furniture requests for this year. And these do fit into our budget for FY23, as you may recall back when we looked at the 5-year forecast. And as I said, it's good for that. It's essentially good for that night, and things start to change after that. And we've had some of that already. But we put together about $400,000 worth of, or estimated about $400,000 worth of total capital equipment. And so this would be about half of that. We'll certainly look through the remaining capital requests and bring those forward. We may have to up that number a little bit. I'm not sure yet, but we'll take a look through that and see what happens. So we'll have more information for the board on that in May.
Brian, is that when so that's a list that I remember from past years.
Yep.
That's the more detailed, or not more detailed, but extensive list that you recommend certain
Prioritize,
ones,
yeah, ones and twos.
Yes, and this
rated.
has that in there as well. The majority of these are number one. So this
Oh,
is
I
the
see.
same list that I will again present in May, but this is part of the list that we know that we want to get moving on right now.
Okay.
The other part will come back in May. When we talk about building renovations for the summer of 2023, we'll begin that discussion in June. So that's a different piece of this. However, there are, they will put building renovations in on this capital outlay form, and we'll transfer those over to that spreadsheet. So we kind of use this as a catch-all to, get all of that information together and then move it to where we need to move it to, if it's this meeting, the next meeting, or in June for building modifications. I think that hopefully that answers your question.
So we're getting them early just to get them rolling.
That's correct.
So so these are the only ones that we need to review and approve if we do on Monday, and then you will send another set that won't include this. 'Cause
That's right. These will be
it would
done,
the ship of sail.
approved on, assuming the board approves those on Monday night, then these will not come back again. You'll have a different list with all of that, the rest of the capital equipment requests for next year. But again, we're looking to get the grants rolling and then also get the orders for the furniture so that we have them hopefully, available in the district for the start of next school year.
Have you seen a pretty large increase in costs on some of these items? Have there been, or is it more just the shipping time and stuff will take?
Right now, these are estimates that come from within the district. And so what will end up happening is, once these are approved, I will work with Kathy Moran in particular in my office to, she'll go out and look to see what sort of pricing we can get on these items, that'll be actual pricing, right? But yes, we are seeing, there's no doubt, we're seeing increases in the costs there, as well as the increase in costs for shipping and increased time for shipping as well. So I think we're gonna see that across the board here, this year. Inflation is running over 7% right now, and so certainly we're not immune to that, and we don't operate in a vacuum, and so we certainly will be seeing increased costs also.
I just wondered if it was going to look much more different as a bottom line.
Yeah.
With this, but, okay.
Why are these expenses, you said these are it's a lot higher than in years past.
Yeah, I think there's really, the majority of what we're looking at right here is the volume, the amount of furniture that we're ordering. So again, repurposing spaces, reutilizing some of the library areas, that type of thing. And so a lot of times what we'll have is just the replacement equipment, so student desks, teacher desks, stools and labs, those types of things, which are also on here right now, but you'll see that there are a number of other items as well, sort of repurposing spaces within the district for student use and some office use as well.
And for those things that have like the student desks, student chairs, we know they have a life cycle. Do you kind of have those in a model for replacement, like on a rolling basis, knowing that we're gonna need to bring in and out, or is it just what's reported each year?
So the associate principals are in charge of that in their buildings, and so they keep sort of a schedule and then retake an inventory essentially every year to look at what they need, because we do have what we would call attic stock, right? So we have stock of those types of items. In the event that something would break tomorrow, we need to replace it, teacher desk breaks, who knows, whatever it might be. And so we would replace those. And then at this time of the year, they will look back at that and say, okay, look, what do we need to add back into our stock to make sure that we have enough?
Got it. And then last question for me at least is, were we able to take care of most of the ones?
Yes.
The full list?
For these right here,
Yeah.
yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we were able to take care of really most of the ones that were here. That's right.
Okay.
Which ultimately is our goal all the time. That's why I asked them, and you'll see in column H on that spreadsheet, I ask for, a priority from, the individuals submitting them. So, and you'll see the majority of those are ones. There are a couple of twos, only because when we looked just at the justification, it kind of made sense, and so really a one is, just to give you an idea, is, look, we really need to have this next year, right? A two is, we're at the point where we're, within the next year or two, we should have, and threes are kind of wish list items that, hey, look, yeah, if we have the money, this would be great to have. So more of a nice to have, not necessarily a need to have. And so we do try to accommodate as many of those priority ones as possible.
Brian, I'm excited to see the 16 and 17, the flexible seating in the math classroom. I see it's,
Yeah.
Do you have any context as to why it's just one classroom? I think it's kind of a common theme, anecdotal feedback and commentary that we hear occasionally is, so much is great about the school, but, the facilities are so old, and my son, frankly, I shouldn't call him out, but was surprised to see blackboards in the classroom instead of whiteboards or smartboards. So I love the migration, at least what I'm seeing or inferring here on the math, flexible seating and whiteboard. Is this perhaps a pilot that they're testing some things out, or is this is the 15th classroom in math and I just don't have the context? That's moved?
Brian, can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
No, I think that this is kind of, you'll see that trend throughout the course of these requests, whether it's library, math classroom, science classroom, we're looking at moving toward that direction of collaborative, flexible learning spaces that promote just those
Right,
things for
good.
our students. So it's the first one, with respect to math classroom, but we're
Okay.
hopeful that we can try on. When you have the space, right, then it promotes that type of instruction and learning opportunities as well. So we're hopeful that you see an increase in that in future years.
Okay,
But really excited. And we have a staff collaborative space here as well, and just promoting opportunities for our staff to get together, to work together, to be in the same space. And our kids, we're really excited about that as well. Hallway seating, kids, giving them the opportunity to be together, to collaborate even during time that's not structured. So hopefully this will turn into future requests as well.
Good, good, great to see that. Thank you.
Who provides the feedback to create those spaces, Brian? Is that through the architecture team? Like, where do we get, when we talk about what that space looks like, how do we define that when you're speccing furniture and?
We have started to bring in, sorry, Brian,
No,
I'll
that's
jump
fine,
in
go ahead.
again. I love talking spaces and facilities and
Facilities, right.
collaboration. We have brought in a couple of companies to provide some recommendations. So we're going to be looking at those recommendations with our DC team, with some staff as well, and looking at what the best options are for those collaborative spaces. So bring people in, have them design up some spaces, look at what they provide to us, get some feedback on it, and then make the best possible decisions for those spaces. So it's really exciting. When you start to get on the whiteboard and vision what those spaces can look like, it's really exciting.
That'd be great to share too, share out and post on our website once we can see what those look like. Because people, it is good to see if there's things and be a part of what's changing and evolving. So,
Absolutely.
thanks.
So if there's no other questions, then we would, ask the board on next Monday night to approve these purchases. And then, as I said, we'll have more information coming forward on capital projects in June and capital purchases in May. Thank you.
Any other questions? It was good? Okay. All righty. I think our final agenda item tonight is the review of the initial vision retreat findings. Dr. Waterman.
I think that's a fantastic segue from facilities into strategic planning.
Yes.
So the last time we talked with the board about our strategic planning process was in March. And essentially, just real quickly, on March 14th at the committee of the whole meeting, we talked about the work that the strategic plan team had done in February, which was essentially step 1 of 3. And step 1 is answering the question of where are we? What's our current reality? And so the strategic plan team did that work on February 24th. They developed a SWOT analysis as a result of that. We shared that with the board in March, got feedback on that from a wide variety of stakeholders, the board included. And then in the interim since then, the strategic plan team met on March 17th to start to tackle the second question, which now if we know our current reality or we know where we're at, the second question is where do we want to be? And so part of that March 17th retreat, the first part of it was presenting all the feedback on the SWOT to the team so that we could finalize that. So what I'm going to do is just point out some page numbers in your packet. Page 145 is that final SWOT analysis, which was, again, the draft was produced by the strategic plan team, but through surveys and through input and feedback from stakeholders, that final document is on page 145. So on March 17th, again, the team started to tackle the question of where do we want to be, and they did that a few different ways. Once they finalized the SWOT, they spent the rest of that day thinking about sort of our, number one, our hopes, our dreams, our aspirations for Lyons Township High School into the future. And you can see the raw data from that information on page 146. They also took some time to review some articles on best practices in education, also did some virtual site visits to some innovative high schools around the country. And that information can be, the raw data from that information can be found on page 149 in your packet. And then I would say the meat of the activities on March 17th was developing a portrait of a graduate, a portrait of an adult, and a portrait of our system, ultimately. And that's on page 153. And the summary of those portraits can be found on page 155. So essentially what that is we're The goal is to think about, for example, for a graduate portrait, the goal is to think about the 1,000 students approximately that graduate from Lyons Township High School every year, and to think through what characteristics, skills, abilities, knowledge do all students have to have, do all graduates have to have. And then taking that a step further, when we think of the adults, the 500 plus adults that work at LT every single day, again, what characteristics, skills, abilities, knowledge levels do they have to have? And then when we think as our system as a whole, what should we be about as a system? What characteristics should be present in our system in order to be defined as successful? So that was a big part of the March 17th retreat. The end result of that is on page 157 and page 158, which is a draft of our mission and our core values. And then if you look at page 160, it's really our preferred future statement. So that preferred future statement includes a draft of the mission, of our core values, and of all 3 portraits. So that page 160 is essentially 1/2 of the strategic plan that we're going to be presenting to the board in June. The other half is what's going to come at our next workshop, which is coming up next Tuesday and beyond. So that's kind of the 50,000-foot view of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going with strategic planning. I would quickly invite, if I missed anything, or to clarify, Allison, Michael, or Julie, who are board member reps on the strategic plan team, what other part of that would you guys add, if anything?
Nothing. Well said, Brian.
Okay, so again, really the important part is we've answered where are we. We're in the middle of answering where do we want to be. In addition to the work that the team did on March 17th, we allowed staff the opportunity last Thursday through planning period PDs to also give input into the graduate portraits, the adult portrait, and the system portrait. And then Dr. Tyrell and I had the pleasure this morning of working with our South Campus students, and then tomorrow we're going to work with our North Campus students doing the same activity. Essentially, give us input into what are those characteristics, skills, and abilities of a graduate, of an adult, and of our system. So I'm just going to go through the questions, and really we're looking for board, any board consensus feedback on, when you had a chance to review the initial findings of the vision retreat, what does the Board of Ed support? What might the Board of Ed disagree with? Did you feel like the Inspire LT team missed a certain part or missed any part of it? And then ultimately it's what feedback would the whole board provide to Julie, Michael, and Allison to take back to the team next Tuesday? Because this is how we'll start next Tuesday morning, is finalizing these portraits and the preferred future statement. So any input you provide tonight, we can take back to that team on Tuesday morning.
Brian, feedback tonight or Monday? Okay.
Tonight, yeah.
It's impressive work. There's a lot of information here and a lot of input. Did you say, again, what's the next steps this week? You said you're doing something with the students.
So today, we did some focus groups with South Campus students, tomorrow with North Campus students.
Got it, okay.
Yep. Yeah, it's a lot of raw data, and we were sharing with our staff last week that obviously the strategic plan website has everything. It has participant handouts, agendas, and it has all the raw data as well. And one of our staff members said it can be overwhelming if you really start looking at all the information that's there. But that's the whole goal of this, right? Is to be completely transparent throughout. So if someone is not on the team, they can follow along every step of the way. But it is a lot.
So Brian, restate again what you're looking for from us tonight.
So really from the pages in your packet, I think the two simplest questions are, or the first initial questions are, what can the board support? What does the board disagree with? And then really, does the board have any consensus feedback to Allison, Michael, or Julie to take back to the team next Tuesday?
And you're talking about the 2 pages at the start of this.
Yeah, really specifically, page 160.
Yeah, it's the back.
Yep.
Yeah, it's that
The
last.
back, yep.
That's where you want the feedback. So, and I just want to understand, the mission and the motto, that's new? Or is
Yeah.
that, okay, that's new.
So that's new.
This is new.
But again, this is all in draft form. So
Got it.
this is what the team, the team is really in the middle of answering that question of where do we want to be? And this 160, in a very, clear way, articulates that.
Summarized, yeah.
So this will change slightly, because we haven't included all of the feedback from staff, we haven't included all the feedback from students yet, and then obviously from the board as well. So this will change a little bit over the next couple of weeks.
And if I recall from the workshop, we did not spend a lot of time wordsmithing a mission or motto. Most
Right.
of the time was spent on exercises to generate kind of creative thinking and kind of dreaming big, and some of the examples of these other schools, and that's where I'm back to those flexible learning environments and saw,
Yeah.
pretty nice, shiny new buildings. But the graduate portrait, the adult portrait, and the system portrait, I recall being a kind of a heavy, a lot of time was spent on those. And what you're seeing, I believe, are the most consistent, frequent, we had a pool of words from which to choose and flexibility to create our own words.
Yep.
And you're seeing kind of the most frequently selected
Right.
words there. So I
And-
think we're looking to see if anything, is jumping off the page, especially in those 3 portraits, as being unclear or not true or something that doesn't feel right, or if, we'd like to think we did a great job, but it is only a room of 85 people, and we don't profess to be experts, and the more input is welcome. So I'm glad to hear you're getting lots of input from different groups, but if the other board members see anything in those 3 boxes in the middle primarily that's missing or just doesn't seem right, let's talk about it.
And then the other part of that is the mission. If you flip to page 156, you'll see the actual drafts of what each table on March 17th developed. And so essentially, that has been all synthesized into the draft mission that was developed.
Got it.
So 10 tables?
Yep.
Okay.
So it's, we're working in groups of 8, so it's about 10 tables of
Yeah.
8-ish.
80 people, okay.
Yeah. So at first, now, I'll just say for myself, I needed this orientation to these pages and the table drafts and everything to really, and to understand the build to get to 160, to really understand it all. So, at first glance, these portraits seem great, although having this, the context and the orientation to what we're looking at, I definitely will reflect on it and may have
Yeah.
more feedback on
Sure.
Monday.
Absolutely.
And then I also would love to revisit it after we get the feedback from the other groups. If you're saying that it's going to change and might look a little bit different, I would love to have that come back to the board so that we can, give it a final look after those other groups weigh in.
So the way it will come back to the board is in the final draft put together with the other side, which will be goals and strategies, and we'll share that with our community. So between April 19th and May 11th is when we bring our team together for the final time, and that's when they'll actually review the final draft. So between May 2nd and May 6th is when we'll administer a survey that shares this with our community, and they'll be able to get feedback on that. So I can share that with the board as well.
Yeah, and so you're saying that you could share it with us before, even if it's in an update or something,
Draft,
before it
yep.
comes back as a final draft,
Yep.
so that we can give some comment if necessary.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
So then, would we want to take a little bit of time, and then Monday, we can have a touch point?
Can we make it by Friday? So here's why, because next Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock, we'll have 85 people ready. So I'll have to compile any feedback from the board and get it to our partner consultant probably by Friday, so him and I can work on Monday to get ready for Tuesday morning. So, and that would be a quick turnaround from late Monday night to Tuesday morning.
I think that's
So,
doable.
so I can shoot an email to you guys tomorrow with kind of what I talked about, and then if by Friday you could send me any thoughts you have, that would be great.
I just want to say, I think it was great and helpful to have that front loading to understand like how it all came together for this. The only thing that kind of stands out to me is I feel like the graduate portrait is very light. in the fact that there's not as much there when you look at it, and then the system portrait is very heavy. As we go down there, there's not as many things, I mean, maybe it was all
Okay.
coming together, but to me, when I look at it, it's more about, I think it should be more about the student to begin with. I mean, that's just my personal thought.
Yeah.
And we don't have as much about the student, we have more about the system. And I really like
Okay.
things even.
Like in terms of the numbers, right? The quantitative
Correct,
numbers.
yeah. It just seems like when you look at it, you're like, oh, it's going down to be heavier on the one end.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like if there's a way to make that, it just seems that there's more of a focus when I look at this initially, just from my initial, there's more of a focus on the system
Right.
and less of a focus on the graduate, which, I mean, you need the system obviously to get the graduate, but I'd like to see, just in my,
It was supposed to be 8 to 10.
Yep,
per-
7 to 10, yep.
Oh, 7
Yep,
to
yep.
10 per.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I see what you're saying.
it's just from like a, just a first
Even from a
glance,
visual perspective.
From a visual
it would be better,
perspective.
yeah.
I just, you know, I'm looking at it and it's just kind of like, well, what about our graduate? It's very light.
Okay,
We take the content out of it, it's just from a visual.
yeah, perfect.
So maybe different breakpoints for the system portrait, you know, you cut it off at a different breakpoint. Or I know there was some aggregating, you know, critical thinker and problem solver, and the graduate portrait had been separate statements or separate choices, so.
Yeah, there's
No,
like
that's a great
12 in the
observation,
system.
though.
I mean, it's just so much, it just seems like a little overwhelming. I don't
Right.
know, but that's my,
Okay, that's really
not
good
from
feedback.
content, but
That's
just
very-
from a visual.
Yeah,
So then you'll follow up with us with an email, and then
Yep.
we'll be able to provide feedback to you by Friday so that you guys are ready to rock and roll
That
next
would-
Tuesday.
that would be great.
Okay, great. All right, I think we can move on then to our non-agenda related public comments. And Marilyn, I think you mentioned we do have some?
We have 2.
Okay, I'll just read my reminder that there are 2 opportunities for audience members to address the Board of Education. We appreciate your participation, but please understand we do not engage in dialogue. If there is a specific question or comment that requires follow-up, the appropriate administrator will respond at a later time. Individuals addressing the board are expected to conduct themselves with respect and civility pursuant to Board Policy 830. Individuals shall not use vulgar or obscene language or impede, delay, disrupt, or interfere with the board meeting. In the event this occurs, you will receive 1 warning regarding your conduct. If the behavior occurs again, you will be notified that you are in violation of trespassing and will be asked to leave our property. Failure to comply immediately and cooperatively with a directive to leave will result in the involvement of law enforcement officials. And so with that, Marilyn, would you please call our first speaker?
Brian Fry.
Next speaker?
Donnie Vajosevic.
Good evening. Thank you. Just wanted to take a minute and ask for an update on the learning loss from the pandemic, kind of where we're at. I know there's been a lot of other topics going on and a lot of other critical things happening within the community and the school that have kind of taken precedent. And I'm curious where we're at with the plan to make up some of this time. I know in that the October annual report for the standardized testing, it was estimated that roughly 525 minutes a week these kids lost out on. And to me, that's a pretty big number. You're looking at someone whose primary focus and concern here is what's going on academically. So anything that you can provide in the future, kind of how we're going to deal with that and address that, I would be really grateful for. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else, Marilyn, or is that it?
That's it.
Okay, great. Thank you. That concludes our non-agenda related public comments. And with that, that concludes our committee of the whole meeting tonight. It's time is 9:57. Can I have a motion then to adjourn?
So moved? Second?
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thanks, everyone. Thanks for sticking around, having a great meeting. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.